Ever wonder if we'll ever truly understand consciousness? Or solve the riddle of free will? This 3-hour journey dives deep into humanity's most perplexing, unsolvable problems. Let your mind wander through these profound mysteries and perhaps find a peaceful sleep as you ponder the imponderable. Let's start with first. The happiness paradox. Happiness is strange. The more you stretch your hands toward it, the more it seems to slip through your fingers like mist. This is the paradox of happiness. The harder you chase it, the further it runs, like a horizon that keeps moving away as you walk toward it. And yet, nearly every human being on this planet has felt the pull to chase it, to construct their days around the hope that someday they will finally catch it and hold it still. But what if the very act of chasing happiness is what ensures it never stays? Think about the times you told yourself, once I achieve this, then I'll be happy. Maybe it was graduating, finding love, earning money, or achieving recognition. And perhaps, when the moment arrived, happiness bloomed, bright, intense, undeniable. But then, without warning, it faded. The glow dimmed. And almost immediately, your mind found another condition, another, if only, to chase. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill, the tendency for humans to adapt quickly to new circumstances, always returning to a baseline of dissatisfaction, no matter how high the peak of joy seemed at first. It is why a lottery winner, after the initial ecstasy, often returns to the same level of happiness they had before the win. It is why someone who once longed for a certain job or relationship can achieve it and yet, after months, feel restless again. When you tell yourself happiness must be earned or captured through some external milestone, you trap yourself on the treadmill, running endlessly, never arriving. But the paradox goes deeper. Imagine happiness as a butterfly. If you chase it with frantic hands, it flutters away, sensing your desperation. Yet if you sit still, quietly, it may land on your shoulder. This is not just poetry, it is the reality of human psychology. Research shows that when people actively monitor their happiness, asking themselves constantly, am I happy yet? Am I as happy as I should be? Their anxiety rises, and their actual happiness decreases. The more they try to measure it, the more it eludes them. Consider the experiments conducted where participants were told to listen to music. One group was simply asked to enjoy it. The other group was told to focus on how happy the music made them feel. The first group relaxed into the rhythm, their joy growing naturally. The second group, burdened by self-analysis, reported less enjoyment, because their attention was split between the moment and the pressure to feel happy enough. This is the paradox in action. Awareness becomes interference, pursuit becomes poison. Think also of how happiness is marketed to us. Entire industries thrive on the belief that if you buy the right product, travel to the right place, or follow the right lifestyle trend, you will finally secure joy. Yet once purchased, once lived, the satisfaction fades and you are left needing more. The chase becomes endless because happiness, when reduced to consumption, is never permanent. It transforms from a gift of being into an addiction of wanting. Even philosophers saw this paradox long before psychology gave it a name. The Stoics advised, happiness is not found in chasing external rewards but in living with virtue, presence, and acceptance. The Buddhists warned, attachment to desire is the root of suffering. Modern science agrees, when happiness is treated as a goal, people end up lonelier, more anxious, and less fulfilled. When it is treated as a byproduct of meaning, love, creativity, or service, it grows stronger without being forced. Let's take a real-world example. Imagine two individuals training for a marathon. The first person's goal is purely happiness. If I finish this race, I will finally feel happy and proud. The second person runs because the process itself, the discipline, the community, the sweat, the rhythm of their heartbeat, brings them meaning. When the race ends, the first feels joy but soon emptiness, because the finish line was the end of their happiness plan. The second feels sustained, because their happiness was never pinned to a single outcome but grew from the path itself. One chased, the other allowed happiness to follow. This paradox reveals something vital. Happiness is not something you grasp. It is something you notice. It often hides in small, fleeting, ordinary moments. Laughter with a friend, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, the taste of food when you're truly hungry, the silence between two heartbeats. These moments cannot be chased, only witnessed. Yet in the obsession to chase larger, permanent happiness, we overlook them. We miss what was always within reach. But here is the twist. Knowing this does not mean you should stop striving, stop growing, or stop dreaming. Purpose, progress, and ambition matter. But they are not the same as happiness. They can be fuel for meaning, and meaning naturally creates fertile ground for happiness to appear. You cannot command happiness, but you can create the conditions where it thrives. Just as you cannot force sleep, but you can set the room dark, quiet, and calm. Happiness arises when life is aligned with values, relationships, and presence, not when it is hunted like prey. So ask yourself, are you chasing happiness as if it's a trophy waiting at the end of the race? Or are you living in a way where happiness might quietly arrive, uninvited, as a companion along the way? The paradox warns us, the first path leads to endless longing, the second to unexpected peace. And perhaps that is the deepest truth. Happiness is not the goal. It is the echo of how you live. It is the reflection of meaning, love, kindness, and acceptance. Stop chasing the echo, and begin creating the sound. The more you let go of the need to be happy, the more you might find that you already are. Time scarcity illusion. You wake up in the morning, glance at the clock, and somehow you already feel behind. Even with an entire day stretched before you, the sense that time is slipping away gnaws at the edges of your thoughts. This is the illusion of time scarcity, a psychological trap that convinces you there is never enough time, even when, objectively, the hours are there. It's not just about schedules or deadlines, it's about how the human mind perceives, distorts, and weaponizes the passage of time against itself. The illusion begins with attention. When you feel overwhelmed, your brain exaggerates scarcity. Psychologists call this the tunneling effect. Like a camera lens narrowing on one object, your focus zeroes in on what you don't have, time, and magnifies it. Ironically, the more you obsess over the lack, the more you waste. You spend minutes worrying about lost minutes, an endless loop that drains the very resource you're trying to protect. Take an example. Imagine you're given a whole weekend with no obligations. At first, it feels like freedom. But as the hours tick on, the anxiety grows. You start calculating, how many hours are left? Am I using them wisely? Should I relax, or should I accomplish something? Suddenly, the abundance of time feels like a weight pressing down, and by Sunday night, you're haunted by the belief that the weekend evaporated. Objectively, it didn't vanish. Subjectively, your mind consumed it long before the clock did. This illusion is intensified by the constant comparison culture we live in. You scroll through social media, seeing people who seem to do more, faster, better. Their days appear to stretch like elastic while yours contract. Neuroscience explains part of this. When you compare, your brain activates circuits of loss and insufficiency. You don't measure hours, you measure inadequacy. And so time itself becomes a currency you always feel bankrupt in. Consider how memory also warps this illusion. Days filled with routine blur together, leaving little trace in the mind. When you look back, the absence of memorable detail convinces you that time has flown by. Where did the year go? You ask, not realizing your brain discarded the sameness of your daily grind. By contrast, novel experiences, travel, risk, discovery, expand in memory. A single week of adventure can feel longer than 3 months of routine. It's not time itself that's scarce, it's the richness with which you live it. Even mortality sharpens this illusion. We know time is finite, but the brain is terrible at conceptualizing infinity or limits. We oscillate between denial and panic. One moment we act as though we have endless tomorrows, procrastinating, numbing ourselves with distraction. The next moment, we feel the crushing terror that life is too short, that we are already too late. Both extremes feed the illusion of scarcity. Either time feels infinite and wasted, or it feels finite and insufficient. Rarely does it feel simply present. This illusion shapes entire societies. In industrial cultures, time is equated with money. Every tick of the clock becomes a transaction, every pause a loss. You feel guilty for resting, guilty for being unproductive, guilty for existing outside the grind. And so your relationship with time is poisoned, not lived, but managed, optimized, squeezed. In contrast, many traditional cultures treat time not as a line but as a cycle, not as a possession but as a rhythm. In such worldviews, the illusion of scarcity softens. Time flows and you flow with it. Scarcity is replaced with participation. And yet, the paradox is this. The more you chase control over time, the less control you feel. You buy planners, set alarms, use apps to measure every minute, only to discover the act of measuring creates more anxiety. You split your day into fragments, but the fragments never feel whole. You stretch yourself thin across tasks, yet each one feels incomplete. It is as though time itself conspires to remind you that it cannot be caged. The way out is not to add more time, but to change the lens. Studies show that when people shift focus from efficiency to meaning, the illusion loosens. If you spend an hour lost in something deeply aligned with your values, creating, connecting, learning, that hour expands in memory and fulfillment. Conversely, when you spend 3 hours in distraction, even abundance feels hollow. The difference is not time's quantity, but time's quality. Think of Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, who wrote that those who had a why to live could bear almost any how. For him, time's meaning did not come from its length but from its depth. Days in the camp were stripped, brutal, finite. Yet those who could locate meaning stretched time into something survivable, even profound. Now, reflect on your own life. How many hours are lost not because they were taken, but because they were blurred with distraction, dulled by worry, or surrendered to the illusion of not enough? How much of your stress comes not from lack of time, but from the story you tell yourself about time? The truth is this: time has always been both infinite and vanishing. You are a creature suspended in that paradox. You can spend your life clawing against scarcity, forever behind, forever unsatisfied. Or you can surrender to the present, step into the fullness of the moment, and realize the illusion dissolves when you stop chasing and start inhabiting. Even with all the time in the world, the mind can invent shortage. But if you can shift the lens, if you can see that time is not something you lose but something you enter, you may find that abundance was always here, waiting for you to notice. Misunderstanding Loop. No matter how carefully you choose your words, no matter how slowly or clearly you speak, there will always be someone who hears something different than what you meant. This is the essence of the misunderstanding loop, an endless cycle where intentions are lost, meanings are twisted, and clarity dissolves into confusion. It is not just an occasional mistake, it is a constant, built into the way human beings process language, perception, and emotion. Think about a simple conversation. You explain a thought to a friend, and they nod along, but later you find out they took your words in an entirely different direction. Perhaps you meant reassurance, but they heard dismissal. Perhaps you meant honesty, but they heard judgment. Communication is not a perfect transmission from one mind to another. It is more like passing a message through layers of filters: memory, bias, expectation, cultural background, mood, and personal experience. Each person reshapes the words to fit their own world, and in that reshaping, truth can get lost. History is filled with catastrophic examples of this loop. Wars have been triggered because leaders misinterpreted the intentions of the other side. A message meant as a show of strength was taken as a declaration of aggression. A promise meant as friendship was read as a threat. On a smaller scale, countless friendships, marriages, and families have collapsed not because love or loyalty disappeared, but because people could not bridge the gap between what was said and what was heard. Words turned into weapons when they were never meant to be. Psychology explains why this happens. We rarely listen to the raw sound of words. We listen through the lens of what we expect to hear. If you believe someone disrespects you, their neutral sentence will sound like an insult. If you trust someone deeply, even their criticism may sound like care. The same sentence spoken aloud can create two entirely different realities, because meaning is not in the words, it is in the interpretation. This is why even the clearest speaker cannot fully control the message. It leaves your lips, but the listener completes it in their own mind. Consider the courtroom, where witnesses describe the same event. 10 people may see one moment, yet give 10 different accounts. The words they choose, the emphasis they place, the parts they omit, all of this changes the story. Now expand this idea to daily life. Every time you speak, your story is being edited by the listener, rearranged according to their beliefs and experiences. Misunderstanding is not a failure of language, it is the inevitable outcome of human perception. And yet, the loop deepens because we try to correct it. You explain again, slower, choosing different words. But sometimes the more you explain, the further the meaning drifts. Have you ever noticed how, during an argument, repeating yourself makes things worse? Each repetition adds another layer of frustration, another chance for tone to be misheard, another opportunity for the listener to decide you mean something darker than you intend. The harder you try to escape the loop, the tighter it pulls you in. On a personal level, this loop is exhausting. A parent tells a child, "I only want you to do well," and the child hears, "You think I am a failure." A partner says, "I need space," and the other hears, "I don't love you." A leader says, "We must be patient," and the followers hear, "You don't care about our struggles." The loop is merciless because it doesn't stop at words, it infects silence too. When someone says nothing, we interpret that silence in the loudest way possible. Silence becomes rejection, or indifference, or hidden anger, even if it was only pause or thoughtfulness. Why does this matter? Because misunderstanding is not just an inconvenience, it shapes reality. Entire relationships, careers, and even historical movements are built or destroyed on what was heard rather than what was meant. The misunderstanding loop is one of the most invisible yet powerful forces shaping human lives. It is why apologies are never simple. You may say, "I didn't mean it that way," but once words are received, their impact cannot be erased. A cut remains even if you explain the knife was not intentional. Is there any escape? Perhaps not fully. But awareness helps. Knowing that misunderstanding is inevitable allows us to approach communication with humility. Instead of assuming others understood us, we learn to check, to ask, "What did you hear me say?" Instead of reacting to what we think we heard, we ask, "Is this what you meant?" This slows the loop, though it never fully ends it. Because humans are not machines exchanging perfect signals, we are interpreters, storytellers, meaning makers. At a deeper level, the misunderstanding loop reflects something about existence itself. Each of us lives in a slightly different reality, constructed by our experiences and beliefs. When we speak, we are trying to bridge two realities with fragile symbols called words. Sometimes they land. Sometimes they shatter in translation. This is why poetry, art, and music often feel truer than plain explanation. They bypass some of the rational filters and reach emotion directly. But even there, misinterpretation thrives. One person's tragic song is another person's anthem of hope. One person's sacred painting is another person's meaningless scribble. Perhaps the loop is not only a curse but also a mystery we must live with. If everyone understood each other perfectly, perhaps life would lose some of its depth. Misunderstanding forces us to explain, to listen harder, to create new ways of connecting. It creates tension, but also growth. It hurts, but it also drives us to search for greater clarity, greater empathy. The loop is frustrating, but it is also evidence of how complex, layered, and endlessly unique human minds are. So remember this, no matter how carefully you speak, you will be misunderstood. But within that inevitability lies a choice. You can resent it, or you can see it as a reminder that words are not enough on their own, that connection requires patience, empathy, and a willingness to step into another's world. The misunderstanding loop is endless, but it is also human. And maybe the point is not to escape it, but to learn how to keep reaching across it, again and again, even knowing you will never be perfectly heard. Self-acceptance chase, when you're told to just love yourself, it sounds so simple. But beneath that phrase lies a labyrinth of contradictions. Because the chase for self-acceptance often becomes the very trap that keeps you from ever arriving. The more you try to prove that you love yourself, the more it begins to feel like performance. Like you are secretly waiting for the world to clap, to nod, to confirm that yes, you are enough. And in that moment, self-love isn't self-love at all. It's still validation in disguise. Think about how often this shows up in ordinary life. Someone posts a picture online with the caption, "Self-love journey." At first, it feels empowering. But beneath the surface, there's a subtle whisper, "Please see me. Please agree that I've grown. Please confirm that I am worthy." The validation they're trying to escape has quietly wrapped itself around the ritual of their self-acceptance. It's as if they're building a house of freedom using bricks handed to them by the very people they hoped to be free from. The paradox is brutal. When you don't care what others think, you often appear strong, grounded, untouchable. Yet when you announce that you don't care, when you feel the urge to prove it, you reveal the opposite, that you're still tethered. This is the chase, the desperate sprint toward loving yourself fully, while constantly glancing over your shoulder to see if anyone is watching, if anyone believes it too. And the more you glance back, the further away the finish line seems to run. Psychologists have studied this loop. One example is the phenomenon called self-perception theory. We judge our own inner states by watching our actions. If we constantly seek validation, our brain interprets it as proof that we're not yet whole. And so, the more you demand affirmation from others, the more you teach your subconscious that you are incomplete without it. It's like trying to heal thirst by drinking salt water. The very act deepens the need. Take relationships. Imagine a partner who constantly demands reassurance. Do you love me? Do you really? At first, it feels tender. But over time, each question erodes trust, because it proves they do not believe it for themselves. In the same way, when we ask the world to approve of our self-love, we prove to ourselves that it isn't rooted. That our reflection is still fragile glass, needing others to polish it into clarity. But the opposite extreme is dangerous too. Some people decide, "I don't need anyone." They mistake isolation for strength. Yet even then, their rejection of validation is still defined by others. It is a rebellion, a stance carved in opposition. Which means, ironically, they are still reacting to the very thing they claim to have escaped. Like a shadow that follows you even when you run from it, validation remains, whether you chase it or flee. So what does real self-acceptance look like? It's quiet. It doesn't need to be announced. It doesn't beg to be seen. True self-love feels almost invisible, because it's not performed. It's the way you drink water without telling the world you deserve it. It's the way you breathe without asking permission. It's ordinary, unglamorous, and deeply liberating. Consider the people you've met who radiated peace. They weren't the loudest. They weren't constantly explaining their journey or documenting it. Their strength was subtle, but undeniable. They didn't reject praise, but they weren't chained to it either. When someone complimented them, it was like wind passing over a mountain, noticed, but not altering its shape. That is self-acceptance, not an arrival point, but a state of no longer needing to chase. Yet society doesn't make it easy. We live in cultures where worth is measured publicly, through likes, applause, achievements. You're taught to showcase your healing, to brand your growth, to perform authenticity. The moment you package your self-love for others to consume, you risk turning medicine into theater. And while the performance may inspire others, if you're not careful, it starves you. Because behind the curtain, you still crave the clapping hands. It's worth asking, why does validation feel so irresistible? Because humans are wired for connection. Belonging was once survival. Being excluded meant death. So the need for affirmation is not weakness, it's inheritance. But when survival instincts collide with modern identity, they warp. What once protected us now chains us. We are left believing that unless someone sees and names our worth, it cannot exist. This is why the chase is so exhausting. You are running from ancient wiring inside your brain, while simultaneously begging it to free you. You cannot fully escape validation. But you can transform your relationship with it. You can let it visit, without letting it live in your house. You can accept the compliment without mistaking it as oxygen. You can share your growth without needing it to be blessed by strangers. That is freedom, not the elimination of validation, but the dethroning of it. One story illustrates this well. The Japanese concept of wabi-sabi celebrates imperfection. A cracked bowl is not discarded, it's repaired with gold, the fracture becoming part of its beauty. The bowl does not beg anyone to approve of its cracks. The cracks simply are, and they shine. If someone sees beauty in them, good. If not, the bowl remains whole. That is the quiet power of self-acceptance. It is the gold you pour into your own fractures, without waiting for others to admire the shine. And here lies the deepest irony. The moment you stop chasing validation for your self-love, people often notice it more. Your energy shifts. You no longer radiate hunger, but calm fullness. And fullness is magnetic. Others are drawn to it, not because you asked, but because they feel it. The applause you once begged for arrives, not because you chased it, but because you stopped needing it. That is the loop's cruel trick. You only win when you no longer care to. So perhaps the question is not, how do I love myself fully? But, can I live in a way where love is not a chase? Can you let your flaws exist without defending them? Can you let your growth be private, your worth be silent? Can you walk into a room and not measure its echo? When the answer becomes yes, the chase dissolves. Self-acceptance is no longer a goal, but the ground beneath your feet. And the paradox collapses into something simple. You already were enough, long before you tried to prove it. The life timing trap. Life seems to place us in a constant tension with time. We're told not to rush, that everything unfolds in its season, yet when we wait, we feel late, behind, out of sync with the world. We're told not to delay, that opportunity comes only once, yet when we act quickly, we feel premature, unprepared, as if we moved before life gave permission. This is the timing trap, the strange paradox where no matter when you start, it feels like the wrong moment. Too early, and you're reckless. Too late, and you're irrelevant. And in between lies an endless unease that you might have missed the right window, the one that rarely reveals itself until it has already passed. Consider love. Some people fall in love too young, and they're told, you don't know what love is yet, you're too early. Others find love later in life and are told, you waited too long, you've missed your chance. Yet both are real, both are valid, both reshape the human experience. Or look at careers. The graduate who dares to launch a company in their early 20s is seen as naive, too soon, not ready. But the 40-year-old who decides to start from scratch is judged for being too late, out of time, chasing something that should have been pursued earlier. It's as if the world sets invisible clocks for every step of our lives, and no matter what hour you arrive, you're already in the wrong room. This trap is more than social judgment. It lives inside us. Think about the nagging voice that whispers, I should have started this years ago. When you pick up a new skill, when you move to a new city, when you decide to finally write that book, play that instrument, learn that language. Regret claws at the edges, a sense that you missed the prime time. And yet, if you had started years earlier, that same voice might have said, you're rushing into this too soon, you're not ready yet, you'll burn out. The human mind is rarely satisfied with the moment it is in. It compares, it contrasts, it constructs alternative timelines where you always began in a better, more perfect moment. The truth is that there is no perfect timing. Timing is a lens we apply retroactively. Imagine a person who took a decade to publish their first novel. At the time, they felt they were too slow, too late to matter. But once the book succeeds, the delay suddenly looks like patience, wisdom, maturity. On the other hand, someone who launches their idea quickly and fails is told they should have waited, gathered more experience. But if they succeed, the narrative flips. They are praised for their boldness, their courage to begin early. Timing, then, is not a law of nature. It is a story we tell depending on the outcome. And yet, outcomes cannot be predicted. That is why the trap is so deep. If you wait for the right moment, you may find the world moved on without you. If you leap without waiting, you may crash into obstacles you weren't prepared to face. Both choices carry pain, and both will make you wonder, What if I had chosen differently? There is also a cultural weight to the timing trap. Societies set unspoken deadlines. By this age you should have a degree, by that age you should be married, by another age you should own a home, have children, achieve stability. Miss those marks, and you feel late. Reach them earlier, and you are warned about rushing, about missing out on other parts of life. It creates an impossible standard. You must synchronize your internal clock with everyone else's, though no two lives ever share the same rhythm. Psychology adds another layer. Studies show that people regret inaction more than action. The job they didn't apply for, the person they didn't speak to, the risk they didn't take. But at the same time, people fear action in the present, because it might be premature. We hesitate, we stall, we calculate endlessly, trying to outsmart the trap. But hesitation itself becomes a prison, a way of ensuring that whichever path we choose, we'll feel it wasn't the right time. So what is the escape? Perhaps it begins by realizing that too early and too late are illusions built by comparison. Compared to whom? Compared to what? Too early compared to a stranger's timeline? Too late compared to an imagined self who never really existed? We measure our moments against stories that are not ours, and then we suffer when we don't align. But your life is not a schedule to be matched against anyone else's. It is a sequence of choices, each alive only in the moment they are made. Think of a seed. Plant it in the soil. Too early, and the frost will kill it. Too late, and the soil has dried. But in truth, millions of seeds grow at millions of times, and no two growths are identical. A tree blooming late still bears fruit. A tree blooming early still provides shade. And what matters most is not the exact day it sprouted, but whether it grew at all. The same applies to us. A person who starts painting at 70 is not too late. They are simply beginning when their life allowed it. A teenager who builds a company is not too early. They are simply creating when passion moved them. The real trap is believing there was ever one correct moment waiting for us like a train we missed. Life is not a timetable. It is a canvas, and every stroke, early or late, contributes to the picture. If you feel too late, remember, you are alive now, and that is the only condition necessary to begin. If you feel too early, remember, time will always move, and beginning gives it meaning. The regret of timing is an illusion, but the regret of never trying becomes very real. So the question is not whether you are early or late. The question is whether you are willing to step into the moment you have, and let it be enough. Because when the end comes, no one remembers whether you started too early or too late. They only remember that you started. Relationship permanence myth. Even the strongest love, the closest friendship, the bond you thought was carved in stone, can fracture in silence. This is the myth of permanence in relationships. The belief that once a connection is forged, it will endure forever. We grow up fed on stories of unbreakable bonds, eternal loyalty, promises sealed in words like always and forever. Yet reality teaches us something far more unsettling. Permanence is an illusion, and even the most unshakable ties can unravel in a single moment. Think of the countless friendships you believed would never fade. The people you once spoke to every day, the ones who knew your secrets, the ones you thought would stand beside you for life. And yet, one by one, time thins the thread. A missed call, a changed routine, a new job, a new city, and the permanence dissolves. It isn't always betrayal or anger that ends it. Sometimes, it is simply silence. What once felt eternal is reduced to memories, and the permanence you trusted becomes a ghost. The same is true for love. Couples who swear their vows, who plan decades ahead, sometimes find themselves living as strangers under the same roof. The reasons vary: betrayal, neglect, shifting values, or simply the slow erosion of attention. Psychologists call this relationship entropy, the natural decay of bonds if they are not continually renewed. Just as a fire dies without fuel, love dies without care. Permanence requires effort, but the myth tells us it should require none. That belief is the trap. Consider how shocking it feels when a forever bond suddenly shatters. A friend blocks you. A spouse leaves without explanation. A sibling cuts ties over an unresolved wound. The pain is so deep because permanence was assumed. You thought the connection was indestructible, so you never prepared for its fragility. When permanence breaks, it feels like the ground beneath your feet was a lie. And in some ways, it was. But this truth can be liberating. When you stop believing in permanence, you start cherishing presence. Every conversation matters because it might be the last. Every embrace, every laugh, every shared silence carries weight because you no longer take it for granted. The myth of permanence blinds us to the urgency of love in the present. Its collapse can awaken us to the reality that bonds are living things. They must be nurtured, tended, protected, and honored in each moment, not assumed eternal by default. Think of relationships as gardens. Left untended, even the richest soil grows weeds. But with care, attention, and renewal, beauty thrives. Permanence was never the truth. Renewal was. What makes a bond meaningful is not its promise of forever, but the choice, again and again, to remain, to forgive, to invest, to love. Without those choices, permanence withers into myth. And perhaps that is the paradox. The more you accept impermanence, the stronger your relationships become. Because you no longer live in the illusion that tomorrow is guaranteed, you pour yourself fully into today. You speak the words you might have left unsaid. You repair small cracks before they split into fractures. You hold those you love with reverence, not assumption. The absence of permanence does not diminish love, it amplifies it. So the myth shatters, but in the shards lies a sharper truth. No bond is immune to breaking. But in knowing that, you gain the wisdom to hold more gently, to love more fiercely, and to live more fully in the fragile miracle of now. Authenticity performance paradox. You've heard it your whole life, just be yourself. It sounds simple, almost liberating. Yet the moment you try, something shifts. You notice how your shoulders tighten, how your voice feels slightly staged, how every gesture seems rehearsed. Suddenly, authenticity itself becomes a performance. This is the authenticity performance paradox. The harder you try to be real, the more artificial you appear, even to yourself. It starts with self-consciousness. The very act of paying attention to how genuine you are disrupts that genuineness. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, telling yourself to look natural. Every muscle in your face stiffens, every smile feels forced, every blink rehearsed. In the same way, when you attempt to act authentic, you become hyper-aware of each word and action. Instead of flowing, they fracture into calculated moves. This paradox reveals a hidden trap. Authenticity cannot be manufactured. The moment it's pursued as a goal, it slips away. Think of a person who insists, "I'm brutally honest, I always speak my truth." Yet the more they emphasize their authenticity, the more it feels like branding, not reality. It's like shouting, "I'm spontaneous," while reading from a script. Social life intensifies this tension. In a culture obsessed with authenticity, on social media, in workplaces, even in dating, the performance of realness often eclipses the real thing. Influencers spend hours editing photos to look effortless, executives rehearse speeches to sound unrehearsed, and ordinary people craft captions to appear raw and unfiltered. Authenticity has become a stage costume, worn to signal honesty while concealing the labor that went into it. But this isn't just about image. It's about identity itself. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre described how we often live in bad faith, acting roles instead of existing freely. The paradox is that even rebellion becomes a role. The teenager who rejects conformity with ripped clothes and defiant stares is still performing for an audience, trying to prove nonconformity by embodying its stereotype. The act of being yourself can turn into a character, another mask. Consider the workplace example. You're told to bring your whole self to work. At first, it sounds empowering. But quickly you begin editing which parts of yourself to display. Enough humor to seem approachable, enough seriousness to seem professional, enough vulnerability to appear human but not weak. You end up constructing a curated version of your true self, one designed to meet invisible expectations. You're authentic, but strategically so. Why does this paradox occur? Because authenticity thrives in absence of scrutiny. When you are immersed, In art, in conversation, in play, you forget yourself. Time disappears, self-consciousness fades, and what emerges feels natural. The moment you ask, am I being authentic right now? The spell breaks. Authenticity is like sleep. You can only fall into it indirectly. Try too hard, and you stay awake all night. Even friendships and love carry this paradox. At first, you want to impress, to be likable, to appear open. But those efforts can strangle genuine connection. Ironically, intimacy deepens not when you try to be authentic, but when you allow silence, awkwardness, and vulnerability to exist without forcing them. People sense authenticity not in polished declarations of truth, but in the small, unguarded moments when you forget to manage impressions. The danger lies in confusing authenticity with performance. If you believe authenticity must look a certain way, raw, loud, quirky, transparent, you risk molding yourself into another caricature. Real authenticity is quieter, stranger, harder to package. Sometimes it looks like uncertainty, sometimes contradiction, sometimes restraint. The paradox softens when you stop chasing authenticity as a product and allow it to emerge as a side effect of presence. So perhaps the real question isn't, am I being myself? But, what am I forgetting to prove right now? The less you strive to show authenticity, the more it surfaces on its own. It lives not in performance, but in the moments you let go of the performance entirely. Authenticity, then, is not something to achieve, but something that happens when you stop trying. The paradox dissolves only when you realize that being yourself is not an act, it is the absence of acting. This draft is about 5,300 characters, fitting yo. Belief confirmation bias. We like to think of ourselves as seekers of truth. We imagine that when we study the world, when we gather information, when we debate and reason, we are moving closer to reality. But in truth, most of us are not searching for what is real. We are searching for what confirms what we already believe. This is the trap of confirmation bias, the silent filter that makes us blind while we think our eyes are wide open. Imagine two people reading the same news article. One sees it as absolute proof that their political stance is correct, while the other sees it as evidence that the media is corrupt and biased. The words on the page did not change, but the minds that consumed them did. This is not an isolated flaw. It is the natural wiring of the human brain. We are not neutral machines processing data. We are emotional beings, constantly bending the world to fit the story we already carry inside us. This bias begins with how we seek information. When you believe something strongly, you naturally gravitate toward sources that echo your view. If you think a certain diet is the healthiest, you'll type into a search bar benefits of this diet, instead of problems with this diet. If you are convinced a person dislikes you, you'll notice every frown, every silence, and ignore the small kindnesses. Your mind hunts for proof that you are right, and it dismisses evidence that you are wrong. In doing so, it builds walls around your beliefs, layer by layer, until even the truth cannot easily break in. The danger is that confirmation bias does not feel like bias. It feels like clarity. It feels like certainty. It feels like, I have done my research, I have looked at the facts, and they all point in one direction. But what really happened is that you unconsciously selected which facts to keep and which to discard. You were the judge, the prosecutor, and the defense all at once, ruling in favor of your own case. The verdict is always guilty or innocent according to your prior belief, not according to reality. History is scarred with examples of this. Doctors once resisted the idea of germs, preferring to believe that bad air caused disease, even when evidence piled up. For decades, smoking was marketed as safe, with studies conveniently ignored because they did not fit the comforting illusion. In trials, eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, because once someone believes they saw the suspect commit the crime, their memory rearranges itself to confirm that belief. Whole societies have crumbled because leaders surrounded themselves with advisors who only reinforced their views, blinding them to warnings that could have changed the course of history. Even science, the very institution designed to guard against bias, is not immune. Researchers are more likely to publish results that support a hypothesis than ones that disprove it. Readers are more likely to share studies that align with their worldview. And in this echo chamber of belief, the world becomes distorted. Truth becomes fragmented. Reality becomes customized, tailored to what we want to see. On the personal level, confirmation bias shapes relationships. If you believe your partner is untrustworthy, every late arrival, every unanswered message, every distracted look becomes proof. If you believe they are loyal, those same actions can be explained away. The facts are the same, but the story changes depending on the belief. And once belief hardens, it is almost impossible to see beyond it. This is why arguments often feel impossible to win, because the other person isn't hearing your evidence, they are filtering it through their existing frame. And so are you. The most haunting part is this. Confirmation bias makes us feel safe. To constantly question everything, to truly embrace uncertainty, is uncomfortable. It makes us anxious. Our brains crave order, stability, and coherence. So we settle for the illusion of truth, the comfort of consistency, rather than the messy chaos of reality. We fool ourselves because it feels good to be right, even if we are wrong. But there is a way to fight back, though it is not easy. It requires a willingness to step into the discomfort of doubt. To ask, what evidence would prove me wrong? To read the article from the opposing view. To genuinely listen to someone whose beliefs clash with your own. It requires humility to admit that your mind is not a neutral observer, but a biased narrator. And it requires courage to value truth over comfort. The irony is that in trying to escape confirmation bias, you can fall into it again, believing that you are one of the rare few who see reality clearly. But none of us are free from it. At best, we learn to notice it, to slow down, to doubt ourselves just enough to remain open. The truth is bigger than any single belief. It does not belong to one side, one ideology, one perspective. It lives in the tension between opposing views, in the cracks between certainty and doubt. So ask yourself, are you really seeking truth, or are you collecting evidence for a story you already believe? The answer may determine not just what you think about the world, but how you live within it. Because when we cling to our own filtered truths, we are not seeing the world as it is. We are only staring into a mirror of our own beliefs. The forgiveness dilemma. Forgiveness is often painted as a universal cure, a noble act that elevates the forgiver above pain. But beneath the poetry of forgiveness lies a dilemma, a double-edged truth that can both set you free and chain you back to the very person who wounded you. To forgive is to let go, yes. But it is also, at times, to reopen the door you once closed for your own survival. And that tension, the clash between healing and self-protection, creates one of the most difficult paradoxes we face. Think about it. Society constantly urges forgiveness. Let it go. Move on. Release the anger. And often, those words carry wisdom. Anger is corrosive. Bitterness eats away at the soul. To forgive can feel like loosening shackles you've worn for years. There are countless stories of people finding peace after releasing grudges, stories of victims who felt lighter once they stopped carrying the weight of hate. Forgiveness, in this sense, is not for the offender, it is for the wounded. It is the medicine for scars that never seem to fade. But what happens when forgiveness is mistaken for permission? When forgiving someone convinces them that their actions carried no consequences? Imagine someone betrays you deeply, a friend, a partner, a family member. You forgive them. They apologize, perhaps. The cycle repeats. Each forgiveness, instead of healing, becomes an invitation for the wound to be reopened. Suddenly, forgiveness is no longer a cure, it's an infection. Instead of freeing you, it keeps you tethered to the harm, teaching the other person that boundaries dissolve under the word, sorry. Psychologists call this the forgiveness trap. On one hand, holding on to resentment can poison your mental and even physical health. On the other, unconditional forgiveness can perpetuate cycles of abuse. The line is razor thin. Forgive too little, and you remain imprisoned in anger. Forgive too much, and you risk becoming a prisoner to someone else's cruelty. Consider the story of victims of long-term manipulation or domestic harm. Many of them are told, often by outsiders, that forgiveness is the right path. But for them, forgiving too soon can be dangerous. It can erase accountability, blur memory of the harm, and lure them back into environments that are unsafe. Forgiveness, when forced, can be a weapon against the vulnerable. In these cases, anger isn't just natural, it is protective. It is the body's alarm bell saying, "Do not go back. Do not let this happen again." And yet, there are stories of extraordinary forgiveness that inspire awe. Survivors who forgive those who harmed them, not to welcome them back, but to release the poison within themselves. These acts reveal a deeper layer. Forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. It does not have to mean restoring closeness. Sometimes forgiveness is a silent act, invisible to the offender. It is choosing to set down the burden without reopening the door. You heal, but you do not invite harm again. The dilemma lies in balance. Forgiveness is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It is contextual. It requires discernment. Who are you forgiving, and for what? Do they seek to change, or do they seek to repeat? Do you forgive to heal, or do you forgive to forget? And in forgetting, do you risk repeating history? There is also the danger of cultural pressure. Many religions and philosophies exalt forgiveness as divine. While the ideal is beautiful, it can silence the truth of human pain. A person who rushes to forgive may bypass the hard work of grief, rage, and boundary setting. They may perform forgiveness externally while rotting internally, because their wounds were never truly acknowledged. Forgiveness offered without full processing becomes hollow, a performance of peace rather than real peace. True forgiveness, then, must be grounded in wisdom. It is not the same as trust. Trust is rebuilt slowly, through proof. Forgiveness is internal, private, a choice to no longer let the wound dictate your inner life. The danger arises when we confuse the two. To forgive someone is not the same as to hand them your heart again. To forgive is not to deny harm, but to prevent harm from defining your entire future. This is why the forgiveness dilemma is so haunting. The very act that may heal you is the same act that, if misunderstood, could harm you again. Forgiveness without boundaries is surrender. Forgiveness with boundaries is freedom. One imprisons, the other liberates. So the real question becomes, when you forgive, are you opening the door to peace within yourself, or are you opening the door back to the person who broke you? Only you can decide. Forgiveness, in its purest form, is not weakness. But neither is withholding it until you are safe. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is forgiving silently in your heart, while never again allowing the offender a key to your life. Because forgiveness, at its core, is not about them. It is about you. It is the art of releasing pain without erasing memory. It is the decision to stop bleeding, without letting the wound be struck again. And that paradox, that razor-thin balance between healing and harm, is the true dilemma of forgiveness. Growth dissatisfaction effect. The strange thing about self-improvement is that the moment you commit to it, you awaken a kind of dissatisfaction that never fully quiets. You begin with hope, maybe even excitement. You set goals, adopt new habits, start working on your body, your career, your relationships, your mind. For a while, every step feels like progress. You can see the difference between who you were and who you are becoming. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifts. As you grow, you stop noticing how far you've come, and instead, you can only see how far you still have to go. This is the growth dissatisfaction effect. It's the paradox where the more progress you make, the more inadequate you feel. Imagine someone who begins running. At first, completing a single mile without stopping feels like triumph. But soon that victory fades. They no longer feel proud of a mile, they criticize themselves for not being able to do 5. When they reach 5, they only see the people running marathons. And when they finally complete a marathon, they compare themselves to athletes breaking world records. Growth moves the finish line farther away every time you get closer. This happens in intellectual pursuits too. When you first begin reading philosophy, every idea feels revolutionary. You feel awakened, expanded, alive. But the deeper you study, the more aware you become of your ignorance. You realize how vast the field is, how many centuries of arguments exist, how many perspectives you have yet to touch. What once felt like wisdom now feels like the barest glimpse of a towering mountain range you may never fully cross. The more you learn, the more you recognize how little you know. Psychologists call this the expertise paradox. Beginners often feel overconfident because they see only the surface. But as you gain genuine expertise, confidence dips, because you see the depth of the subject. In other words, growth makes you painfully aware of the gap between your current self and your ideal self. And because the ideal expands the more you grow, the gap never fully closes. You can reach heights you once dreamed of, and yet feel as though you're still at the base of the mountain. Think about wealth and success. Someone who earns their first stable income feels relief. But soon, the baseline shifts. They look at others making more, and dissatisfaction creeps in. The promotion that once seemed like everything becomes merely a stepping stone to the next. Each time you level up, the ceiling rises higher. Progress creates perspective, and perspective breeds comparison. Growth shows you possibilities you once couldn't even imagine, but by showing them, it also shows you how much you haven't yet achieved. There's danger here, because the dissatisfaction effect can turn self-improvement into a prison. Instead of celebrating milestones, you dismiss them as inadequate. Instead of noticing growth, you criticize yourself for not being farther along. This is why people can be in the best shape of their lives, yet feel unhappy with their bodies. This is why someone can reach levels of success their younger self would have called impossible, yet still feel like failures. Growth without reflection becomes an endless chase, where every step forward only deepens the sense that you're falling behind. But here is the twist. Dissatisfaction is also proof of growth. The reason you feel the gap more sharply is because your vision has widened. You can see farther than before. The dissatisfaction is not a sign of failure, it is evidence of a higher standard. Think of a musician. A beginner who can barely hold a rhythm feels proud just to complete a song. But a professional, playing flawlessly, can hear tiny imperfections invisible to others. Their dissatisfaction is the very thing that pushes them into mastery. If they were fully satisfied, they would stop reaching. So the key is not to escape dissatisfaction, but to reframe it. To understand that the gap is not something to close once and for all, it is a horizon that moves as you move. You don't measure yourself against where you could be. You measure yourself against where you were. Progress is not erasing the distance to perfection. It is simply proving, day after day, that you are no longer standing still. There will always be farther to go. There will always be a higher peak, a deeper insight, a stronger self, a greater achievement. But the fact that you can see them now means you are already farther than you think. Dissatisfaction whispers, "You're not enough yet." But if you listen carefully, it's also saying, "You've grown enough to see more." And maybe that is the truest sign of progress. Not comfort, not contentment, but the restless knowledge that the journey will never end. The choice is whether you see that as a curse, or as proof that life still has infinite places to take you. Meaning search loop. The harder you look for life's meaning, the less certain it feels. This is the loop so many of us get caught in, a search that feeds itself, a hunger that grows the more you try to satisfy it. You ask, what is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? What does it all mean? And for a moment, you may grasp at answers, faith, philosophy, career, love, legacy. Yet almost as quickly as they arrive, doubt seeps in. You question whether these answers are real or simply stories you've told yourself to soothe the void. The meaning you thought you captured slips through your fingers, leaving you even less certain than before. Psychologists call this the meaning crisis, the modern tendency to demand certainty about purpose in a universe that refuses to give any final answer. The paradox is cruel. The more you interrogate the question of meaning, the more fragile every answer begins to look. Like shining a bright light into clear water, the reflection disappears the moment you stare too hard. Think about the countless philosophies that tried to settle the question. Religion promises one kind of meaning, science another, humanism another still. Each feels convincing, until you notice how many conflicting meanings exist. If billions of people live by different answers, how can you ever be sure yours is the one? The more you study, the more you see contradictions, and the more uncertain you feel. The loop deepens. And then there is the personal chase. Some seek meaning in work. If I create enough, if I achieve enough, my life will matter. But once the milestone is reached, emptiness returns. Others seek it in relationships. If I am loved, if I build a family, I will know my purpose. Yet love, too, shifts, falters or fades, leaving the question echoing louder than before. The loop whispers, was that really the meaning, or just a distraction? The philosopher Albert Camus once described life as absurd. The human mind craves meaning in a universe that offers none clearly. We are like travelers knocking on a locked door, expecting an answerer who never comes. But Camus suggested something radical. Instead of being crushed by the silence, embrace it. Perhaps meaning is not something to be found, but something to be made. The loop tightens when you demand certainty. It loosens when you allow meaning to be a story you create, even knowing it could dissolve tomorrow. Imagine two people staring at the night sky. One obsesses over the question, why are we here? What's the ultimate reason? The vastness feels unbearable. The other does not demand an answer but finds meaning in the act of wonder itself, in the feeling of awe, in the bond of sharing that moment. The stars do not reveal their secret, but the second person no longer needs them to. The meaning is not in the cosmos but in the experience of seeing. This is the way out of the loop. Stop demanding a final truth and start living the small truths. Instead of asking, what is the meaning of life? Ask, what brings meaning to this moment? The certainty may never come, but presence can. And presence, repeated, builds a life that feels meaningful. Not because you solved the question, but because you chose to stop chasing it like prey. So yes, the search loop is real, and its trap is endless. But in realizing that, you can step out. Meaning may never be permanent, but it doesn't have to be. It can be chosen, built, lived, and remade again and again. And maybe, just maybe, the fact that you must create it yourself is not a weakness, but the most powerful freedom you've ever had. Emotional wave trap. You feel it begin like a tide swelling beneath the surface, a flicker of anger, a rush of joy, a sudden ache of sadness. The instinct is always the same. Control it. Stop the rise, freeze the motion, capture the high or bury the low. But emotions are not stones to be held still. They are waves. They surge, crash, recede, and return again, often without your permission. This is the emotional wave trap. The illusion that you can freeze feelings, when in truth they move with a rhythm far deeper than conscious will. Consider happiness. You feel a spark of it in a moment of success, in laughter with a friend, in the warmth of a memory. Instantly, your mind grasps at it. Stay here, don't go. But the harder you cling, the faster it slips. Like water cupped in your palms, joy escapes through the spaces between fingers. What remains is not sustained happiness, but disappointment that you could not hold it. The trap is sprung. In trying to preserve the wave's crest, you tumble into its trough. Sadness, too, tempts us into this trap. When grief or despair rises, we resist. We press it down, distract ourselves, numb it, drown it in noise. Yet the repression doesn't erase the wave, it only drives it deeper, where it gathers force, waiting for the moment to break violently across your life. Psychologists warn that suppressed emotions do not vanish. They resurface as tension, illness, or sudden outbursts you can't explain. The more you fight the wave, the more destructive it becomes when it inevitably returns. This illusion of control is everywhere. You believe you can manage love, pacing its intensity, deciding when to feel vulnerable. But love is its own tide. It rises when you least expect, crashes when you're unprepared, and often recedes against your will. You believe you can freeze anger, locking it away behind clenched teeth, but later it erupts in a misplaced moment, amplified by the hours of compression. Even fear, the most primal wave, will find its rhythm despite your resistance, flooding your body with trembling and pulse no matter how you command it to stop. History shows this truth clearly. The Stoic philosophers, often misunderstood as suppressors of emotion, never advised freezing the wave. Instead, they spoke of riding it. Seneca wrote that emotions, like storms, cannot be banished, but they can be endured. The Stoics sought perspective, not paralysis. You cannot choose whether the sea will rage, but you can learn how to navigate when it does. Modern psychology echoes this wisdom in the practice of mindfulness, which teaches that emotions must be observed, allowed to crest and fall, without attachment or aversion. Think of surfing as a metaphor. A surfer does not stop the ocean. They do not cling to the crest of one wave or forbid the next. They learn balance, timing, surrender. They fall, they rise again, and in the process, they experience the beauty of movement. Emotions are the same. When you ride them, you flow with their impermanence. When you fight them, you drown. Yet the paradox of the emotional wave trap is that even joy, when clung to, becomes suffering. The happiest day of your life carries within it the shadow of its end. The birth of a child, the height of love, the triumph of achievement, all are waves that crest with intoxicating brilliance, only to recede. If you demand permanence, you turn sweetness bitter. If you accept impermanence, you taste it fully while it lasts. This is why the pursuit of emotional control often leads to emptiness. People seek to flatten their waves, avoiding pain by avoiding passion, avoiding grief by avoiding love. But a still sea is lifeless. Without waves, there is no movement, no journey, no meaning. It is not in the freezing but in the flowing that life is lived. So the question becomes, can you stand in the middle of the ocean of your own heart without grasping or resisting? Can you let joy crest, knowing it will fade? Can you let sorrow fall, knowing it will rise again? Can you accept that emotions, like tides, belong not to you, but to the deeper currents of existence itself? You cannot stop the waves. You cannot freeze the sea. But you can learn to ride. And perhaps, in surrendering the illusion of control, you will discover that the beauty of life was never in holding one feeling forever, but in moving through all of them, again and again, like waves that remind you you are alive. Fairness dispute, principle, fairness. It is one of the most powerful words in the human language, and yet one of the most slippery. Ask 10 people what is fair, and you will hear 10 different answers. Some will say fairness means equality, everyone receives the same. Others will say fairness means equity, everyone receives according to their need. Some will insist that fairness is about merit, that people get what they earn. And some will argue that fairness is about balance, that losses and gains cancel out in the long run. No matter how you frame it, someone will always disagree, because fairness is not an absolute truth. It is a human invention, and it changes depending on where you stand. Consider a simple example. 2 children are splitting a cake. One says fairness means cutting it exactly in half. The other says fairness means giving the bigger slice to the one who is hungrier. Both are convinced their definition is right, but the cake cannot satisfy both truths at once. The dispute does not come from the cake, but from the lens through which each child views justice. Multiply this problem by billions of people, and you begin to see why humanity has never agreed on fairness. History is built on fairness disputes. Revolutions have ignited because peasants believed it was unfair for nobles to hoard land while they starved. Wars have erupted because one nation claimed it was unfair for another to control resources or territory. Laws are rewritten again and again to address the endless tug-of-war over what fairness should look like: taxation, wages, healthcare, education, justice systems. Each reform is celebrated by some as progress and condemned by others as betrayal. Because what is fair for one group almost always feels unfair to another. Even nature seems to betray the very concept. A person born into poverty and hardship may cry out that life itself is unfair, while another, born into privilege, may not even see the imbalance. A student who studies hard but still fails an exam because of poor teaching feels cheated, while the system insists the grading is impartial. A worker who earns more money than their peers may believe they are simply reaping the rewards of effort, while those peers see favoritism or luck. Fairness is never objective, it bends to perspective like light through glass. Psychology reveals why. Humans are wired with self-serving bias. we naturally define fairness in ways that benefit us. If we work hard, fairness means reward by effort. If we are struggling, fairness means being helped according to need. If we succeed, fairness means keeping what we've earned. If we fail, fairness means asking for a second chance. Each of us is the hero in our own story, and fairness becomes a script written to justify our role. That is why debates over fairness rarely resolve. They are not really debates about truth, but about identity and self-interest. Take the justice system as an example. To a victim's family, fairness might mean the harshest possible punishment for the criminal. To the criminal's family, fairness might mean mercy and rehabilitation. To lawmakers, fairness might mean consistency across cases. Each perspective is emotionally charged, and none can be dismissed as entirely wrong. Yet they cannot all coexist without colliding. The principle of fairness divides because it is built on competing values: compassion, equality, merit, survival. Even on the global stage, the fairness dispute principle plays out in haunting ways. Wealthy nations argue it is unfair for them to shoulder the full burden of climate change policies, when developing nations are still industrializing. Developing nations argue it is unfair to deny them the path of growth that wealthy nations already took. Both are right, and both are wrong, depending on which lens you choose. In truth, fairness is not a stable compass, it is a mirror reflecting the biases of whoever is holding it. The most haunting realization is this: perhaps true fairness does not exist at all. Perhaps it is only an illusion humans chase to make sense of chaos. Life is indifferent. Accidents, illnesses, disasters, and death do not ask what is fair. They strike randomly, crushing one life while sparing another. And yet, because humans crave order, we invent systems to simulate fairness: laws, ethics, moral codes. These give us the feeling that the universe plays by rules, even when it does not. But this does not mean fairness is meaningless. Even if it is unattainable, striving for it gives shape to civilization. Disputes over fairness force us to reflect, to argue, to negotiate. They expose our selfishness, but they also push us to develop empathy. The impossibility of universal fairness is exactly why it remains such a powerful ideal, because in chasing it, we are driven to build societies that at least try to reduce suffering, even when perfection is out of reach. So the next time you hear someone say, "That's not fair," remember, they are not just describing reality, they are revealing their values, their fears, their position in the world. Fairness is never universal. It is always personal, and the dispute over it will never end. Perhaps the real principle is not fairness itself, but the endless, unresolvable struggle to define it. And maybe that struggle is the closest thing humanity will ever have to justice. The letting go paradox. Letting go is one of those phrases we hear everywhere. Just let it go, release it, move on. It sounds so simple, almost effortless, like dropping a stone from your hand. But anyone who has actually tried knows the truth. The more you tell yourself to let go, the more you seem to hold on. The harder you push to release, the tighter your grip becomes. And that is the paradox of letting go. Think of a sleepless night. You're lying in bed, your mind racing, and you whisper to yourself, "Relax. Stop thinking. Just let go." But the command backfires. The harder you try to stop thinking, the louder the thoughts become. Every effort to let go feels like another chain tightening around your chest. You're not freeing yourself, you're fighting yourself. Letting go has become another form of holding on. Psychologists call this the ironic process theory. When you deliberately try to suppress a thought, the brain ends up scanning for it more, making it stronger. Tell yourself, "Don't think of a white bear," and a white bear will flood your mind. In the same way, when you try to force yourself to let go of pain, memories, or people, your brain locks even harder onto them. You're gripping by trying not to grip. This shows up most painfully in love and loss. A breakup happens, and well-meaning friends say, "Let them go." So you try. You delete their pictures, you erase their messages, you even practice affirmations of release. Yet with every attempt, they return to your mind sharper, more intrusive, as if absence itself has carved them deeper into your thoughts. The more you demand yourself to let go, the more the memory defines you. Why does this happen? Because letting go is not a forceful act, it is a surrender. The mind doesn't understand the command, forget. It only understands attention. And wherever you place attention, energy flows. If you stare at the wound demanding it heal, you keep the wound open. If you stand at the edge of a cliff shouting, "Don't fall," all your awareness goes to the fall. Letting go cannot be achieved by effort. It can only happen when effort stops. This is why monks, sages, and spiritual traditions speak of detachment not as a battle, but as a release. Imagine holding a rope in your hands while being dragged across the ground. You tell yourself, "Let go of the rope." But you keep pulling, keep tightening because in your mind, you still think gripping is safer than falling. True letting go is not tightening harder, not demanding release, it is simply opening your hands. The paradox is that you can't force it. You can only allow it. Consider grief. People often pressure themselves to let go of someone they lost. They believe moving on means erasing, forgetting, shutting down memory. But grief doesn't work like that. The more you fight against remembering, the more memories ambush you. Healing begins when you stop demanding erasure and instead allow the memory to exist without control. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting the person, it means no longer gripping the pain as proof of love. The paradox also appears in ambition and control. Think of the artist who tries so desperately to create a masterpiece that their work becomes rigid and lifeless. But the moment they stop trying to let go of perfection, when they relax into the flow, something alive emerges. Or the athlete who performs best not when they obsess over every movement, but when they release control and trust their body. Letting go is not achieved through tension, it arises in the absence of it. Even in relationships, the paradox is sharp. People cling to control, saying, "I'll let them go when I know I'm over them. I'll move on when I feel ready." But readiness never comes. Because readiness is another form of gripping, the belief that you must manage the process. In truth, letting go doesn't wait for readiness. It arrives the moment you no longer argue with what is. So how do you resolve this paradox? You stop trying. You stop turning letting go into a task, into a checkbox, into a battle with yourself. You allow space. You allow time. You breathe. You accept that the mind will bring the thought, the memory, the person, and instead of pushing it away, you let it drift without chasing. That is the secret. Letting go is not about removing, but about ceasing to hold. It's like holding sand in your fist. Squeeze tightly, and it slips away faster, cutting your palm. Open your hand, and the sand rests there gently. To grip less is to keep more peace. To release effort is to gain freedom. The paradox dissolves when you understand that letting go is not an action, it's the absence of one. The moment you stop demanding it, forcing it, commanding it, you realize it was never about control. It was about trust. Trusting that life continues, that healing comes not through strangling the wound, but through letting it breathe. And maybe that is the quiet lesson of letting go. It cannot be chased, it cannot be forced. The more you try, the further it runs. But the moment you stop running, it sits beside you, quietly, as if it had been waiting all along. Identity shifting fog. Identity is something we cling to as if it were solid, permanent, and unchanging. We say, "This is who I am," as though we've carved it into stone. But if you pay attention long enough, you realize the truth is much more fragile. Who you are shifts faster than you can even define yourself. Just when you think you've figured out your place in the world, a new experience, a new failure, a new relationship, or even a new thought bends you into someone else. You live inside what might be called the identity-shifting fog, where the outlines of self are never fixed, but constantly dissolving and reforming. Think about your past selves. The person you were 5 years ago, the way they spoke, the way they dressed, the things they believed, might feel like a stranger now. You might even cringe at them, wonder how you ever thought the way you did. And yet, back then, you believed with full conviction that this was you, that your choices, your identity, your perspective were real and final. But the fog shifted, and a new version of you emerged. The same will happen 5 years from now. The person listening to these words today will one day be just as unrecognizable to your future self as your past self is to you now. This constant transformation unsettles us. We long for a stable identity because it gives us the illusion of control. If you can name yourself, you can feel anchored. You can say, I am this kind of person. These are my values. This is what I believe. But the moment you try to hold on too tightly, life moves the ground beneath your feet. You experience loss, and suddenly you are not the same. You fall in love, and your priorities shift. You fail at something you thought defined you, and the cracks spread through your entire sense of self. Identity, rather than being a fortress, reveals itself as smoke, endlessly reshaped by the winds of time. Psychologists have found that memory itself contributes to this fog. We don't remember events the way they happened. We rewrite them each time, filtering them through who we are now. That means your identity is not only shifting forward, it is also rewriting backward. You are constantly editing your past, sculpting the person you used to be into someone who makes sense to the person you've become. In this way, even your history is unstable, never final, always bending to the demands of the present. Consider how often people reinvent themselves. The shy child becomes a bold adult. The believer becomes a skeptic. The skeptic becomes a seeker of faith. People who once declared they would never do something find themselves doing exactly that. Each time, it feels authentic, as though this new version is the real one. But authenticity is not a single, permanent self. It is simply alignment with the current moment of who you've become. What felt false yesterday may feel true today. The fog shifts, and with it, the shape of you. This is why identity crises feel so destabilizing. They are not failures of self. They are glimpses of the truth that the self was never fixed in the first place. You panic because you thought you could hold on to a definition, but the fog has moved, and the outline no longer matches. Yet, this same fog is also the reason growth is possible. If you were fixed, if you were permanently locked into one identity, you could never change, never escape patterns, never evolve. The instability that frightens us is the same instability that allows us to become more than we once were. Think about art, philosophy, science, all driven by people who reinvented themselves again and again. A scientist who abandons one theory to embrace a new one is not betraying themselves, but stepping into a new identity demanded by discovery. An artist who shifts style, who breaks free of their own earlier work, is not inconsistent. They are embodying the truth that creation requires constant self-erasure. Even friendships and relationships echo this. Sometimes people drift apart not because one betrayed the other, but simply because the fog shifted, and two identities that once aligned no longer overlap. The danger lies not in shifting identity, but in resisting it. When you cling to outdated versions of yourself, you suffer. You try to preserve a self that no longer fits. You force yourself to stay in careers, relationships, or roles that belong to someone you used to be, not someone you are now. And so, life feels suffocating, as though you are playing a part that has grown hollow. But when you allow the fog to move, when you let your identity dissolve and reassemble, you find freedom. You realize you are not betraying yourself by changing. You are betraying yourself only by refusing to. So who are you? The answer is always the same. You are the shifting. You are not the outline, but the fog itself. You are not the definition, but the act of redefining. And maybe that is the most liberating truth of all. To know that you do not need to cling to a fixed self, but can step into each version as it arrives, and let it go when it fades. Because the person you are right now will not survive forever. But something else will emerge from the fog. And that, too, will be you. Anger control spiral. Suppressing anger feels safe, at first. You swallow the words you wanted to say, force a smile you don't mean, bury the heat rising in your chest. You tell yourself, it's better this way. Don't cause conflict. Don't let it out. And for a moment, it works. The room stays quiet, the relationship feels intact, the storm is hidden behind your ribs. But the paradox of anger is that what you suppress doesn't disappear, it ferments. And when it finally escapes, it rarely comes out as a calm explanation. It comes out as an explosion. Psychologists describe this as the anger control spiral. When you bottle your rage, the pressure inside you grows, like steam inside a sealed container. The longer you hold it in, the more volatile it becomes. A small annoyance, a misplaced word, a forgotten chore, a casual remark, can suddenly trigger an outburst wildly out of proportion to the moment. To the outside world, it looks like you snapped over nothing. But inside, you know it was the weight of months, even years, of unspoken fury finally breaking loose. Think of relationships where silence is mistaken for peace. A partner doesn't argue, but quietly absorbs resentment. They nod, they comply, they keep the peace. But beneath the surface, anger coils tighter. Then one day, the smallest spark, maybe a dish left in the sink, or a careless joke, becomes the breaking point. The suppressed anger erupts not just at that moment, but at every moment that was left unspoken. And the other person stands there stunned, asking, where did this come from? The truth is, it came from everywhere. From every dismissal, every swallowed frustration, every moment when honesty was traded for quiet. The spiral works like this: anger suppressed, resentment grows, emotional pressure builds, sudden eruption, regret, back to suppression. The cycle repeats, damaging trust, communication, and even physical health. Because anger, when buried, doesn't just harm relationships, it corrodes the body. Studies link chronic suppression of anger to higher stress, anxiety, and even cardiovascular disease. The body keeps the score when the mouth stays shut. But here's the twist: anger itself is not the enemy. It is information. It signals that a boundary has been crossed, that something feels unjust, that a need is not being met. To suppress anger is to ignore the message your mind and body are sending you. And when you ignore a message long enough, it returns louder, harsher, more destructive. So what breaks the spiral? Expression, but not explosion. Anger needs a release, but not through violence or cruelty. It needs voice. It needs clarity. Saying, this hurt me. This matters. I need this to change. When spoken early, anger is manageable, even constructive. When swallowed, it mutates into something monstrous. Think of anger as fire. Uncontrolled, it destroys. Suppressed, it smolders until it erupts into wildfire. But tended carefully, it gives warmth, cooks food, fuels progress. The difference is not whether you feel anger. You will. The difference is whether you deny it until it controls you, or acknowledge it before it does. So the next time you feel anger rise, ask yourself, will I let it vanish into silence, knowing it will only return stronger? Or will I face it now, naming it, releasing it, before it grows into something I can no longer control? Because the spiral always promises safety in silence, but safety is the one thing suppression never delivers. Purpose fulfillment fade. You spend years chasing it, the dream, the milestone, the purpose that feels like the reason you were put here. Every sacrifice, every late night, every ounce of ambition pours into reaching that summit. And then, one day you arrive. The promotion, the recognition, the relationship, the finish line. For a fleeting moment, euphoria floods your body. You've done it. You've achieved the very thing you once believed would complete you. But almost as quickly as the triumph comes, it fades. The air feels thinner at the top than you imagined. The cheers echo, then dissolve into silence. The goal you thought would define your existence suddenly feels like just another step, not the destination. This is the purpose fulfillment fade, the paradox where achieving your life's goal leaves you staring into a strange emptiness, wondering, what's next? This fade is not a failure of willpower, but a feature of human psychology. Our brains are wired with what scientists call hedonic adaptation. Pleasure spikes when a desire is fulfilled, but soon the nervous system recalibrates, bringing us back to baseline. It is the same mechanism that keeps you restless after buying something new or moving to a new place. But when applied to life goals, those defining dreams you thought would give you permanent meaning, the effect cuts much deeper. Think of Olympic athletes. For years they train with near religious devotion, every decision orbiting around a single purpose: the medal. But countless stories reveal what happens after victory. Depression, loss of identity, even crisis. Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympian in history, admitted that after reaching the pinnacle of success, he questioned why he should keep living at all. The goal was achieved, but the self who achieved it was suddenly without direction. The same story plays out in quieter lives. The student who sacrifices everything for a degree, only to graduate and feel hollow. The entrepreneur who dreams of selling their company, only to feel adrift once the deal is done. The parent whose identity is wrapped in raising children, who then leaves them to the world and is left with silence. Achievement delivers closure, but closure also means ending. And endings always open into uncertainty. Why does this fade hurt so much? Because we mistake goals for destinations when they are only markers along the way. We anchor our identity in becoming something, believing that once we become it, the journey will stop. But purpose is not static. It is dynamic. The moment you freeze it, it slips through your grasp. Fulfillment was never in the achievement itself, but in the striving, the becoming, the sense of direction. Once the direction dissolves, so does the meaning. Philosophers have long warned of this. Nietzsche spoke of the last man, a figure who achieves comfort, security, satisfaction, yet loses the will to create, to struggle, to aspire. Viktor Frankl, surviving the void of the concentration camps, argued that meaning must always point beyond the self, beyond the moment, beyond achievement. Life asks us not, "What do you want from me?" but, "What do I demand of you next?" The fade comes when you think the question has been answered forever, only to discover it must be asked again. The trap is in believing purpose can be completed like a checklist. But the truth is harsher, and more liberating. Purpose evolves. Each achievement reshapes you, and the new self hungers for a new direction. If you cling to a completed purpose, you risk living in nostalgia, recycling a victory that no longer feeds your growth. If you let purpose breathe, it transforms. The summit becomes a plateau, the plateau becomes a trailhead, and life remains in motion. But how do you live with this? How do you face the silence after the applause fades? The answer may be in reframing purpose not as a single goal, but as a series of unfolding horizons. Instead of asking, "What's my ultimate purpose?" ask, "What is the next demand life is placing before me?" Instead of tying your identity to one achievement, root it in the act of responding, creating, serving, growing. This doesn't erase the ache of the fade, but it gives it meaning. The emptiness after fulfillment is not proof that the goal was worthless. It is proof that you are alive, still in motion, still capable of becoming more than the person who achieved it. The fade is not the end of purpose, it is the signal to expand it. So when you reach the summit of your long-sought goal, don't expect permanence. Expect the wind to shift, the silence to arrive, the question of "what's next?" to emerge. And instead of resisting it, step into it. Because purpose was never meant to be finished. It was meant to keep unfolding, wave after wave, horizon after horizon, until the very end. Knowledge, ignorance, expansion. The deeper you step into knowledge, the wider the shadows of ignorance stretch around you. At first, learning feels like climbing a mountain. Each fact, each concept, each discovery is a stone beneath your feet, and as you rise, you believe you are approaching the summit, seeing more, knowing more, grasping the truth of things. But then, something strange happens. The higher you climb, the more mountains you see beyond the horizon, each one taller, more mysterious, more infinite than the last. Knowledge does not shrink ignorance, it expands it, revealing how vast the unknown truly is. Think of a child who learns about the stars. At first, they are told that the night sky is filled with twinkling lights. That feels complete, simple, comforting. Later, they learn that those lights are suns, distant and burning with unimaginable energy. Awe grows. But then comes the next realization. Each of those stars may hold planets, and each planet may hold life. Suddenly, the universe does not feel smaller, but impossibly larger. The knowledge, instead of bringing closure, opens doors into endless corridors of uncertainty. This is why the wisest minds in history have been the most humble. Socrates, often called the father of philosophy, declared that his wisdom lay in knowing that he knew nothing. Isaac Newton, after unraveling the laws of motion and gravity, described himself as a child playing on the shore, while the great ocean of truth lay undiscovered before him. Even today, physicists probing the fabric of reality admit that each discovery only multiplies the questions. Every answer leads to a dozen mysteries. The universe is not a book to be finished, it is a labyrinth that grows deeper with every step. Psychology shows us the same pattern in human understanding. At first, when we know very little, we are overconfident. We believe we see the whole picture. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Those with the least knowledge often think they know the most. But as learning deepens, confidence collapses. We begin to see the edges of our ignorance, and they stretch endlessly in every direction. Paradoxically, the more competent we become, the more humble we feel, because we finally understand how much lies beyond our grasp. Consider medicine. Centuries ago, people believed illness came from curses or bad air. It was simple, complete, and wrong. Then came germs, then viruses, then genetics, then epigenetics, then the microbiome, then quantum biology. Each discovery made the picture clearer, but also infinitely more complex. Now we know enough to save millions of lives, yet not enough to explain consciousness, or to cure the simplest common cold with certainty. Knowledge has exploded, but so has awareness of our ignorance. This paradox touches every field. In history, learning about one culture reveals connections to dozens more. In art, mastering one style exposes thousands of techniques left unexplored. In philosophy, solving one question only raises 5 deeper ones. The more doors you open, the more you realize the house of knowledge has no end, only new wings being built as you walk through it. And there is a haunting beauty in this. To know that you will never reach the end is not failure. It is freedom. If there were a final truth, a last page, a point where nothing remained to be discovered, perhaps life would lose its depth. It is the infinite expansion of ignorance that gives knowledge its spark. We learn not to conquer mystery, but to dance with it. But there is also danger. When people forget this principle, when they believe their knowledge is complete, arrogance takes over. Leaders, scientists, entire societies have collapsed because they mistook partial understanding for ultimate truth. They closed their minds to the infinite unknown and clung to certainty. That certainty breeds dogma, and dogma blinds. The real path of wisdom requires us to remain aware of our ignorance, to carry humility like a compass as we navigate the ocean of what we do not know. So the next time you learn something new, notice the hidden expansion it creates. Notice how one answer breeds 10 questions. Notice how truth, instead of being a solid wall, becomes a window opening to a vast landscape. Knowledge is not a lantern that burns away all darkness, it is a lantern that shows you how endless the darkness really is. The paradox is this: the more you learn, the less certain you become. And perhaps that is the very definition of wisdom, not to know everything, but to know how little you truly know. Isolation-connection conflict. We live in a tension that almost feels impossible to escape. On one side, we crave solitude, the quiet refuge where no one's demands intrude, where the noise of the world finally falls silent, where we can breathe without having to perform. But on the other side, there is an ache, a hunger for connection so deep it almost feels carved into our bones. We long for intimacy, for someone to understand us without explanation, for the warmth of belonging. And here lies the conflict. The more we withdraw to protect our solitude, the more we starve for connection. Yet when we seek connection, we risk suffocating the very solitude we needed. Think about how often this contradiction appears. After a long day of people, you want nothing more than to be alone. The thought of one more conversation feels unbearable. And yet, when you finally sit in silence, a different ache rises. Loneliness creeps in, whispering, "Is this emptiness really what you wanted?" The heart twists, because solitude and loneliness are only a thin line apart, and crossing from one into the other can happen without warning. This paradox is not a flaw, it is the human condition. Psychologists explain it as the tug between autonomy and belonging. Autonomy is the need to be self-governing, to have your own space, your own choices, your own independence. Belonging is the need to be part of something larger, to be seen, to be held, to be valued. Both are vital. Both are inescapable. Too much solitude, and the soul withers in isolation. Too much connection, and the self disappears under the weight of others. Writers, philosophers, and mystics have wrestled with this conflict for centuries. Henry David Thoreau retreated into the woods to live alone at Walden Pond, seeking truth in solitude. And yet, even he confessed that, "I had 3 chairs in my house, 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship, 3 for society." Even the great champion of solitude admitted that isolation alone could not sustain him. Solitude gave him clarity, but connection gave him humanity. Think about relationships. How many couples break apart not because of lack of love, but because one partner needs more space while the other craves more closeness? One withdraws into solitude, the other feels abandoned. One seeks connection, the other feels suffocated. The dance between these needs is fragile, and when misunderstood, it becomes a battlefield. Technology complicates the paradox even further. In the digital age, we are more connected than ever. Thousands of messages, endless feeds, voices at our fingertips. Yet people report feeling lonelier than ever before. Why? Because this flood of shallow connection often drives us to retreat, to seek solitude as defense. But the longer we stay withdrawn, the more we ache for real, deep, authentic connection. It is a loop that feeds itself endlessly. And here is the hardest part. Neither solitude nor connection can be permanently satisfied. Solitude, when too long, turns into emptiness. Connection, when too consuming, turns into loss of self. The balance is not a permanent state but an ongoing rhythm, like breathing in and breathing out. To inhale solitude, to exhale connection. To retreat and to return. To be with yourself fully, and then to offer yourself to others. The conflict is sharper for sensitive souls. Introverts often need solitude as oxygen, yet they can ache most fiercely for meaningful bonds. Extroverts thrive in connection, yet often feel the hidden burn of exhaustion when they lack solitude. No one escapes the paradox. It simply takes different forms depending on our temperament. So how do you live with this contradiction? You stop trying to resolve it once and for all. You stop chasing the fantasy that one day you'll find the perfect state where you're never lonely and never overwhelmed. Instead, you begin to treat solitude and connection as tides. You learn when to step back into yourself, and when to step forward into others. You give yourself permission to crave both, to need both, without shame. True solitude isn't about cutting the world away forever. It's about creating a space where you can return to yourself, so that when you do connect, it is real, not desperate. And true connection isn't about merging so completely that you lose yourself. It's about meeting another as a whole being, not as someone starving for completion. The paradox dissolves when you realize it isn't a flaw to want both. It is proof that you are human. To crave solitude is to honor your selfhood. To crave connection is to honor your belonging. And the conflict between them is not a problem to solve, but a rhythm to live. So the next time you feel torn between disappearing into silence and reaching for someone's hand, remember, both desires are sacred. Both are necessary. You are not broken for wanting solitude, and you are not needy for longing connection. You are simply alive, carrying the eternal conflict that shapes what it means to be human. Responsibility trade. Freedom is one of those words we romanticize. We picture open skies, limitless choices, the ability to shape life on our own terms. But the truth is far heavier. Every ounce of freedom you gain comes with a new weight pressing on your shoulders. The more choices you are allowed to make, the more responsibility you inherit for the consequences of those choices. Greater freedom never arrives alone, it always drags burdens behind it. This is the trade we cannot escape. Think of the first time you left home. For years you probably dreamed of independence, the ability to decide when to sleep, what to eat, where to go. And then, suddenly, it was yours. No one told you what to do anymore. No one set the rules. It was intoxicating, but also terrifying. Because now every meal depended on your effort. Every bill was your problem. Every mistake was yours to own. What felt like liberation carried the weight of self-sufficiency. Freedom revealed itself as both gift and burden in the same breath. This paradox runs through every stage of life. When you're young, rules and limits can feel suffocating. You want the freedom to choose your own path. But once you gain it, you discover the price, the loss of safety nets. Children may be controlled, but they are also protected. Adults may be free, but they are exposed to the full storm of life. With every door that opens, another form of weight enters. The same applies in society. A country that values liberty must also grapple with responsibility on the individual level. Freedom of speech, for example, is celebrated, but it also forces us to confront the chaos of voices, some uplifting, some destructive. The burden is learning to discern, to tolerate, to engage, instead of hiding behind censorship. The freedom to pursue your dreams means also carrying the risk of failure. The freedom to earn wealth comes with the responsibility of how it's used, and the consequences it creates for others. Psychologists call this the paradox of choice. When options multiply, freedom grows. But so does anxiety. The burden is not simply in choosing, but in knowing that you are accountable for choosing poorly. You can no longer say, "I had no choice." Freedom erases that excuse. You chose, and you must live with what follows. That weight is invisible until you carry it, and once you do, you understand why some people secretly long for less freedom, for simpler paths, for lives where decisions are already made for them. History shows this trade vividly. Soldiers returning from war often struggle, not just with trauma, but with the overwhelming freedom of civilian life. In the military, choices are limited, orders are clear. In civilian life, everything is open. What career to pursue, where to live, who to become. The freedom is exhilarating, but the responsibility is paralyzing. Similarly, revolutions that overthrow kings or dictators promise freedom, but in the aftermath, societies collapse into confusion. The burden of governance, of collective decision-making, replaces the simplicity of being ruled. Even on the personal level, think about relationships. The freedom to end a toxic relationship empowers you, but it also burdens you with loneliness, with the responsibility of building something new. The freedom to choose your partner means you must bear the consequences of choosing wrong. Every freedom deepens the weight you must carry. And yet, this trade is not cruel, it is necessary. Without responsibility, freedom would mean nothing. If your choices carried no consequences, they would have no meaning. Imagine a life where every mistake could be undone instantly, where every risk had no cost. At first it sounds ideal, but quickly you'd realize, choice itself would lose its value. You could wander endlessly, never committing, never caring. The burden is what makes freedom real. It sharpens choice into something that matters. This is why true freedom is not about escaping responsibility, but about embracing it. A free person is not someone who does whatever they want, whenever they want. That is chaos, not freedom. A free person is someone who accepts that every act shapes not just their life, but ripples outward into the lives of others. They accept that the weight they carry is part of the privilege of choice. But this realization can feel crushing. You may long for freedom, only to find that responsibility nearly breaks you. So the question becomes, are you willing to carry the weight that comes with the wings you've asked for? Can you accept that your choices will hurt sometimes, that they will fail sometimes, but that you will still be the one to stand beneath them? Because freedom without burden is an illusion. Responsibility without freedom is oppression. But together they form the true human condition. To walk through life with both the power to choose, and the burden to answer for what you chose. And maybe that is why freedom feels so heavy. Because it is not meant to be light. It is meant to shape you, to test you, to remind you that the gift of directing your own life is also the responsibility of carrying its full weight. Thought suppression backfire. Trying not to think of something makes it impossible to stop thinking about it. This is the cruel trick of the mind. The more you push a thought away, the more power it gains. You tell yourself, don't think about it, don't picture it, don't let it in. Yet the harder you resist, the louder it echoes. Psychologists call this the ironic rebound effect, or more commonly, the white bear problem. If I tell you right now, not to imagine a white bear, its fur, its cold breath, its slow steps across ice, you cannot help but see it. The very instruction to avoid the thought brings it into focus. This is why heartbreak is so tormenting. You tell yourself not to think of the person who left, not to replay the memories, not to imagine their face. But each attempt at suppression circles back into obsession. The brain, monitoring itself to check if the unwanted thought is gone, ironically reactivates the very image you're trying to bury. It's like trying to put out a fire by pouring gasoline. The backfire of suppression appears everywhere. Someone with anxiety tells themselves, "Don't worry, stop worrying, block the thought." But the brain, scanning for signs of worry, inevitably finds it. Insomniacs lie in bed whispering, "Don't think about not sleeping, just relax." But by resisting the thought, they ensure their minds stay wide awake. Even guilt and shame follow the same pattern. The more you try to silence them, the more haunting their whispers become. It's not weakness. It's wiring. The human brain evolved to monitor threats. When you declare a thought forbidden, the brain interprets it as dangerous, tagging it for constant surveillance. This is why avoidance never works. It teaches the mind that the thought must be important. Like a forbidden fruit, it becomes irresistible. So what is the way out of the backfire? Not suppression but acceptance. Instead of saying, "Don't think of this," you say, "There it is." You let the thought exist without giving it fuel. You observe it like a passing cloud, not a storm you must fight. Mindfulness practices are built on this principle, inviting every thought, even the ugly ones, into awareness without judgment. Strangely, when you stop trying to force thoughts away, they loosen their grip. Imagine a child tugging at your sleeve, desperate for attention. The more you try to push them aside, the harder they pull. But when you finally kneel, acknowledge them, and listen, the pulling stops. Thoughts behave the same way. Suppression makes them louder. Acceptance quiets them. The paradox of thought suppression is that your freedom comes not from controlling the mind, but from letting go of control. The thoughts you fear most may still appear, but their power fades when you stop wrestling them. What was once an iron cage becomes just background noise. So the next time an intrusive thought surfaces, remember, the key is not to shout, "Go away," but to whisper, "I see you." And in that small shift, the thought loses its teeth. The backfire turns to release. Truth perception divide. You and I could stand in front of the same painting, read the same sentence, or witness the same event, and yet walk away carrying completely different truths. This is the truth perception divide. The unsettling reality that even when truth itself is constant, perception bends it into separate worlds. Two people can see the same thing, yet interpret it in ways so radically different that each becomes convinced the other is blind. It begins with the architecture of the mind. No two brains are identical. Your memories, beliefs, traumas, and desires form a lens through which every new truth must pass. What feels obvious to you may be invisible to someone else, not because they are ignoring reality, but because their mind reshapes it before it even reaches awareness. Like light passing through stained glass, truth arrives tinted by the colors of past experience. Consider eyewitness testimony. Two people can witness the same car accident, yet one swears the light was green, the other swears it was red. Both are sincere. Both believe they are reporting truth. Neuroscience tells us that perception is not a camera capturing facts but a construction, pieced together from fragments. Attention skips details, memory fills gaps, bias tilts interpretation. Truth divides not at the event, but in the fragile human machinery that processes it. This divide grows sharper when emotion enters. Imagine two siblings hearing the same words from their parent, "I'm proud of you." To one, it lands as affirmation, filling a wound of insecurity. To the other, it rings hollow, filtered through years of feeling overshadowed. The words are the same, the truth is the same, but the meaning fractures. Emotions amplify or distort perception, making one truth blossom into radically different realities. History is built on this divide. Revolutions, wars, and movements often begin with groups who look at the same conditions but interpret them differently. To some, a leader is a savior. To others, a tyrant. To some, a law is justice. To others, oppression. Entire civilizations have split because two sides gazed at the same truth and saw incompatible worlds. This is not always about lies or propaganda. It is about the subjective filters that shape what we call truth. Even science, which aspires to objectivity, wrestles with this divide. Two researchers may examine the same dataset, one seeing evidence of breakthrough, the other seeing noise. Paradigm shifts in history, from Newton to Einstein, from classical physics to quantum theory, often emerged because someone dared to interpret the same facts through a new lens. The truth didn't change, the perception did. But here lies the paradox. If truth is constant yet perception divides, where does that leave us? Are we trapped in solipsistic bubbles, never able to agree? Not entirely. While perception divides us, dialogue bridges the gap. When two people share their interpretations, they do not erase the divide, but they expand their horizons. Truth may not collapse into one perspective, but the awareness of difference itself becomes part of the truth. The danger comes when we forget this. When you assume your perception is the truth, everyone else becomes delusional. Conflict hardens, empathy collapses, and the divide grows into war. The humility to recognize that perception is partial, that your truth is a fragment of a greater whole, may be the only way to navigate the divide without tearing reality apart. Think of the parable of the blind men and the elephant. Each touches a part, trunk, tusk, ear, leg, and each insists he alone knows the truth. To one it is a snake, to another a spear, to another a fan, to another a pillar. Each is right, and each is wrong. Only by weaving the fragments together does the fuller truth emerge. So when two people see the same truth and interpret it differently, it is not proof of deception, it is proof of humanity. Your truth is not false. Theirs is not false. Both are incomplete. The divide is not a wall but a mirror, reminding you that reality is always larger than any single perspective can hold. The real challenge, then, is not to win the argument of who sees truth correctly, but to ask, what part of the elephant am I missing? What hidden colors does their stained glass reveal that mine does not? In that humility, the divide becomes less a fracture and more a bridge. And perhaps, the most authentic truth we can hold is this: no one owns the whole picture. We live in fragments, divided by perception, united only when we dare to stitch those fragments together. The habit-breaking strain: the harder you try to let go of a habit, the tighter it seems to grip you. At first, you believe quitting is a matter of willpower. Just decide to stop, and freedom will follow. But instead, the moment you declare, "I will not do this again," your mind begins to circle it like a predator around prey. The forbidden act takes on a glow, a weight, an importance it never had before. What once was casual now becomes irresistible, because the human mind does not simply release what you forbid, it magnifies it. This is the habit-breaking strain. Psychologists call this the ironic process. When you try not to think about something, your brain checks constantly to make sure you are not thinking about it. But in checking, it brings it back to the surface again and again. Try it. Do not think of a white bear. And instantly, the image flashes into your mind. The same happens with habits. The smoker who says, "I will not light another cigarette," finds that cigarettes fill their thoughts more than ever before. The eater who swears off sugar cannot stop imagining dessert. The person who vows not to check their phone feels its presence burning in their pocket like fire. Suppression strengthens obsession. The strain is not just mental, but physical. Habits carve pathways in the brain, neural circuits reinforced by repetition, like grooves worn into stone. When you try to stop, those circuits still fire, demanding their reward. The mind craves the familiar release, the hit of dopamine, the comfort of routine. And the more you resist, the more your stress rises, which only makes the craving louder. You become trapped in a vicious loop, resistance feeding tension, tension feeding desire, desire feeding collapse. History is filled with examples of this struggle. Prohibition in the United States banned alcohol, but consumption surged underground, turning drinks into symbols of rebellion. Entire industries were built from the very thing society tried to outlaw. The forbidden became more alluring precisely because it was forbidden. On a personal level, think of every New Year's resolution abandoned within weeks. Not because people lacked sincerity, but because the very act of fighting their habits gave those habits more power. The most haunting part is that habits disguise themselves as comfort. You do not cling to them because you love them. You cling because they provide a momentary shield against stress, fear, or boredom. But when you try to strip them away suddenly, the shield cracks, leaving you exposed. The brain resists that vulnerability with everything it has. This is why some people relapse harder than before. The mind, starved of its familiar ritual, comes back demanding twice the dose. Yet there is a paradoxical truth hidden in this struggle. You cannot destroy a habit by brute force. The more you wrestle with it, the more energy you give it. Real change comes not from fighting but from reshaping. A smoker does not succeed by obsessing over not smoking, but by replacing the ritual. Finding something else to hold, something else to breathe, something else to anchor restless hands. A worrier does not succeed by telling themselves, stop worrying, but by training the mind to focus on different thoughts, different stories. Habits are not erased, they are rewired. And even then, the strain never fully disappears. The old pathways in the brain remain like scars, ready to awaken if you stumble. This is why people who quit addictions years ago can relapse in a single weak moment. It is why change feels so fragile, so temporary. Because in truth, you are not just breaking a habit, you are breaking a piece of yourself and rebuilding from the fragments. But there is hope in this darkness. If the mind clings harder when you fight, then the answer is to stop fighting in the same way. To accept the craving when it arrives, to watch it without judgment, to let it pass like a storm without rushing to hide. This practice, mindfulness, weakens the habit because it steals its power to control you. The craving comes, but it does not define you. The thought arrives, but it does not command you. Over time, the grip loosens, not through violence, but through awareness. The habit-breaking strain teaches us a brutal truth. The more you try to crush something inside you, the more it resists. But if you learn to redirect, to reshape, to accept, then the grip begins to slip. Habits may never vanish completely, but they can be transformed. And perhaps that is the real victory, not in destroying them, but in proving that you can outgrow them. Legacy control illusion. We spend so much of our lives haunted by the idea of legacy. The thought that when we are gone, something of us must remain. A name etched into memory, a story passed down, a footprint that refuses to fade. But here's the unsettling truth. You can't control how you'll be remembered after you're gone. Legacy feels like something you can shape, like wet clay in your hands. But in reality, it belongs to those who survive you, not to you. And the more you try to control it, the more it slips beyond your grasp. History itself proves this. Great figures imagined they were securing eternal glory, yet centuries later they are remembered in ways they never intended. Julius Caesar sought to be worshipped as a god, but for many he is remembered most for betrayal, the knife of Brutus, not the crown on his head. Vincent van Gogh died in obscurity, believing himself a failure. Yet after his death, his paintings were exalted, his suffering romanticized, his life reshaped into a myth he never authored. Legacy is not truth, it is perception, filtered through time, retold until it becomes something new. The illusion of legacy control runs deep in our psychology. We build achievements, we gather titles, we chase recognition, all under the quiet hope that they will anchor us into eternity. People start charities with their name, carve monuments, write books, leave behind wealth. Yet even those vanish or transform. Buildings crumble, words are reinterpreted, names are attached to causes that drift far from their original purpose. Legacy is a story the living tell, not a story the dead can write. Think of how memory shifts even within families. A grandfather may be remembered by one grandchild as a stern disciplinarian, and by another as the warmest protector. The same man, two legacies. The truth of who he was becomes fractured into shards of memory, each tinted by emotion, each carrying only part of the picture. Multiply that by hundreds of people, by generations, and the legacy of a life becomes a collage of interpretations, sometimes unrecognizable to the one who lived it. There is a danger in obsessing over legacy. It can drive people into lives of performance, where every choice is made with an imagined audience in mind. Instead of living authentically, they live for the biography they hope will be written later. But this pursuit backfires, because the tighter you try to control the story, the less real it becomes. And when stories are less real, they crumble. People remember authenticity, not performance. They remember how you made them feel, not how carefully you sculpted your image. But there is another way to view it. If legacy cannot be controlled, then perhaps it is not ours to worry about at all. The obsession with how we will be remembered is really a fear of death itself, a fear that when our body vanishes, we will vanish too. Legacy feels like a shield against oblivion. But chasing it means living for a future we will never see, rather than the present we actually inhabit. The irony is this: the people most remembered are often those who never tried to be. Think of those who acted with quiet integrity, who gave fully in the moment without concern for history's judgment. Their impact rippled outward, not because they were chasing remembrance, but because they were living truthfully. Their legacy was born in authenticity, not control. And so, the legacy control illusion is not meant to depress, but to liberate. You cannot dictate how others will hold your memory. You cannot script the story that will be told. But you can choose how fully you live now, how present you are with the people who share this moment with you. That presence becomes the real gift, not the shadow you hope to cast after. When the final chapter of your life closes, the pen passes to others. They will write your story in ways you cannot foresee. Some may distort it, others may honor it. But in the end, legacy is not something you leave, it is something others create from the fragments you've given them. And once you accept this, you stop trying to control the story and start living it. Because the truth is, the only part of legacy that is ever truly yours is today. Change resistance reflex. Change is one of the strangest forces in human life. We crave it, we dream about it, we make plans for it. Yet when it finally arrives, even the changes we begged for, prayed for, worked toward, something inside us resists. Even desired change feels uncomfortable at first. This is the change resistance reflex, a built-in tension where the very thing we want unsettles us the moment it becomes real. Think about how often this plays out. You want a better job, you get the offer, and then suddenly you're filled with anxiety. What if you can't handle it? What if you made the wrong decision? You wanted freedom, yet you feel fear. Or take relationships. You long to leave behind loneliness, to finally find someone, but when the relationship deepens, you feel the discomfort of losing your independence, of reshaping your routines, of exposing your vulnerabilities. You wanted intimacy, but when it arrived, it burned against the skin of your old self. Even positive lifestyle changes provoke this reflex. You decide to start exercising, to wake up early, to eat healthier. But the first week feels like punishment. Your body aches, your cravings scream, your habits fight back. Rationally, you know this is what you want, to feel stronger, more alive. Yet emotionally, it feels wrong. Change unsettles the equilibrium. Your brain, wired for familiarity, interprets new patterns as threats, even when those patterns lead to growth. Neuroscience confirms this. The brain loves efficiency. It builds pathways to repeat what is predictable. When you introduce change, the brain has to burn more energy, disrupt routines, forge new circuits. Discomfort is not proof that change is bad. It is proof that your mind and body are doing the hard work of rewiring. The reflex is biological, not moral. But because it feels like resistance, many people mistake it for failure. They think, if this was the right choice, it wouldn't feel this hard. And so, they give up before the new pattern has a chance to stabilize. Consider historical examples. When electricity was first introduced, many resisted it. People clung to gas lamps, afraid of this strange new power coursing through wires. Today, we can't imagine life without it. The discomfort of change was not proof that electricity was wrong. It was proof that humanity was stepping into a new rhythm. The same happened with cars, the internet, even books centuries ago. Every revolution feels unnatural at first, even to those who eventually embrace it most. On the personal scale, think about recovery. Someone who leaves behind addiction often experiences an almost unbearable discomfort in the early stages. They want sobriety with every part of their being, yet the new life feels alien, raw, incomplete. The body craves the old comfort, the old routine. Only by pushing through the resistance does the change become the new normal. This is why so many New Year's resolutions fail. The resistance reflex kicks in, and instead of expecting discomfort, people interpret it as a sign of impossibility. But the truth is that discomfort is not a warning to stop, it is a signal that you are crossing a threshold. You are leaving behind what is familiar, and your system is protesting. The real question is whether you can endure long enough for the new pattern to stop feeling foreign and start feeling natural. Philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard describe this as the dizziness of freedom. Change opens possibility, but possibility itself can feel terrifying. When you step into the unknown, you confront the death of your old self. And every death, even the death of outdated habits or outdated identities, carries grief. You are mourning the comfort of what you once knew, even as you step toward what you truly want. So how do you navigate the change resistance reflex? By expecting it. By naming the discomfort for what it is. The friction between the old pattern dying and the new pattern being born. By realizing that the unease is not a verdict against the change, but the natural toll for transformation. If you accept this, you won't mistake the initial pain as failure. You'll see it as evidence that the change is real, alive, reshaping you. And perhaps the deepest truth is this. Change always feels uncomfortable at first because comfort belongs to the past. The old self has rehearsed it, lived in it, made it familiar. The new self has not yet had time to breathe. But give it time, and today's discomfort becomes tomorrow's comfort zone. What feels unnatural now may one day feel like second nature. So the next time you face a shift, even one you asked for, even one you know you need, remember, the resistance is not a sign that you are on the wrong path. It is the proof that you are on it. Honesty hurt dilemma. Telling the truth can deepen trust, but it can also wound. This is the honesty hurt dilemma, the double-edged nature of truth, where every word carries both the possibility of connection and the risk of destruction. We like to believe honesty is always the best policy, that truth is inherently noble. Yet anyone who has spoken a difficult truth, or heard one, knows how sharp it can cut. Think of the moment when someone asks, "Do you really love me?" Or, "What do you think of what I created?" Or, "How do I look?" The truth may bring closeness, reassurance, or growth. But it can also bring tears, insecurity, or distance. Honesty offers intimacy, but it offers no guarantee of comfort. This dilemma plays out in every human bond. In friendships, brutal honesty can clear away pretense and anchor a relationship in trust. But the same honesty, delivered carelessly, can fracture what it was meant to protect. In families, truths about past mistakes or hidden struggles can heal generations of silence, or unleash anger that echoes for years. In love, honesty about feelings, doubts, or desires can either fortify commitment or unravel it entirely. Psychologists call this the truth-telling paradox. People value honesty in principle, yet often punish those who deliver it. A manager who gives candid feedback risks resentment. A friend who points out self-destructive behavior risks being shut out. A partner who confesses discontent risks ending the very bond they hoped to save. And so we walk a tightrope, balancing between truth and protection, always asking, will my honesty build or will it break? Yet consider the alternative. Suppressing truth may keep the surface calm, but it seeds distrust beneath. When honesty is withheld, the silence itself becomes a kind of lie, and over time, the relationship corrodes. People sense when something is hidden, and the lack of transparency creates distance more damaging than the initial truth might have. In the long run, unspoken truths hurt more deeply than spoken ones. The dilemma, then, is not whether to tell the truth but how. Honesty without compassion is cruelty. Honesty without timing is recklessness. But honesty with care, with empathy, with context, with a recognition of the other person's heart, can cut less sharply and heal more fully. Think of it as surgery. Painful, yes, but necessary for healing when done with precision and care. The paradox is that the very thing that can cause pain is also the only thing that can sustain real trust. A truth might sting today, but it becomes the soil in which deeper closeness can grow tomorrow. A lie might soothe today, but it plants a fracture line that may one day split everything apart. So the honesty-hurt dilemma is not a trap to avoid, but a weight to carry with intention. It asks, are you willing to risk temporary pain for lasting trust? Are you willing to wound in order to heal? Are you willing to speak truths that may shake a relationship, knowing silence will destroy it slowly? Because in the end, the hardest truths are not the ones that hurt the most. The hardest truths are the ones left unspoken, echoing in the spaces between people who no longer dare to be real. Risk-necessity problem. You feel the pull of two forces inside you. On one side, the yearning for safety, the instinct to protect, to preserve, to remain intact. On the other side, the hunger for more, the ambition to leap, to win, to touch something larger than yourself. Between these two forces lies the risk-necessity problem, the haunting paradox that life's greatest rewards demand risks that could also ruin you. Think of love. To open yourself to another person is to risk rejection, betrayal, heartbreak. Yet without that leap, you remain untouched, isolated, safe but hollow. Every lasting relationship was born from a moment of risk. Someone dared to be vulnerable, dared to be seen, dared to fall. The reward is intimacy, belonging, the deepest form of human connection. But the cost is that same intimacy could shatter you into pieces. Consider creation. Every artist, writer, inventor, or entrepreneur stands on the edge of exposure. To put an idea into the world is to risk ridicule, failure, or obscurity. Yet every breakthrough that has ever changed history, every book that survived centuries, every discovery that reshaped civilization, was built by someone who risked collapse. Leonardo da Vinci's experiments failed more often than they succeeded. Tesla died penniless, misunderstood, though his risks electrified the world. The pattern is clear. To create is to gamble, and the stakes are always identity, reputation, sometimes survival. Even survival itself is shaped by risk. Evolution rewards those who dared. The first creature that crawled onto land, the first human who braved fire, the first explorer who crossed an ocean. Each carried the chance of death, extinction, catastrophe. Yet without them, progress would have frozen. Life advances only through those who accept that destruction is the shadow of transformation. Psychology explains why this paradox cuts so deep. The human brain is wired with loss aversion. The pain of loss weighs heavier than the joy of gain. This means that even when rewards far outweigh the risks, fear pulls stronger than hope. And yet, history is not written by those who avoided loss, it is written by those who faced the possibility of it. But the risk-necessity problem goes further. It asks not just whether you will take risks, but how much destruction are you willing to accept in pursuit of meaning. The climber who scales Everest risks death in pursuit of glory. The soldier risks life in pursuit of freedom. The whistleblower risks reputation in pursuit of truth. None of these rewards come cheap. They are bound to the edge of annihilation. And here lies the torment. Not taking the risk is also a risk. Stay safe and you risk stagnation, regret, the slow erosion of spirit. Play small, and you risk reaching the end of your life having never lived at all. In this way, safety becomes its own form of destruction, quiet, invisible, but no less final. This is why the problem is unsolvable. To live fully, you must risk greatly. But to risk greatly is to stand always on the edge of ruin. The paradox has no escape, only navigation. Some will avoid it, shrinking into safety, surviving but never soaring. Others will embrace it recklessly, gambling everything, and sometimes losing it all. The wisest learn to walk its razor's edge, to choose risks aligned with their deepest values, so that even if destruction comes, it was in service of something worth the fall. And perhaps this is the final truth. Life is not meant to be preserved like a relic. It is meant to be wagered. The most meaningful rewards are bound by their fragility, their danger, their impermanence. Love matters because it can break. Creation matters because it can fail. Triumph matters because death waits at its borders. Without risk, reward is empty. With risk, it becomes alive. So the question is not, will you risk? The question is, what is worth risking for? Because one way or another, the problem will find you. And when it does, your answer will shape whether your life was merely protected or profoundly lived. Grief's endless return. Grief is not a straight road that you walk down and leave behind. It is not a wound that heals cleanly, sealing itself shut until the scar is faint and forgotten. Grief is a tide. It pulls back, it weakens, it allows you to breathe again, but then, without warning, it surges forward, crashing into you with the same force as the day you first felt it. Loss fades, yes, but it never fully disappears. It lingers in the body, in memory, in silence, waiting for the smallest crack to return. You may think you've moved on. Days stretch into months, and the sharpness of loss softens into something bearable. You laugh again, you work, you love. Life rebuilds itself around the absence. But then a smell drifts past you, the scent of someone's perfume. Or you hear a song playing in a shop, the same one that once filled a car ride or a kitchen dance. Or you glance at a stranger in a crowd, and for one dizzy second, you swear it is them. And suddenly, grief rushes back, raw and merciless, as though no time has passed at all. This is the endless return. Grief does not ask permission, it does not schedule its visits. It hides in the ordinary, ambushing you in the middle of laughter, or in the stillness before sleep, or in the way light falls across a chair they once sat in. And when it returns, it does not always arrive with tears. Sometimes it comes as anger or guilt, or a hollow ache in the chest. Sometimes it comes as a strange peace, a bittersweet recognition that the love remains, even if the person does not. Psychologists explain that grief imprints itself deep within the brain. Memories tied to powerful emotions do not vanish, they are stored like hidden files, waiting to be triggered. This is why anniversaries, even unspoken, can bring waves of sorrow. The body remembers what the mind tries to bury. Trauma and love intertwine, leaving pathways that never fully fade. And so, the return of grief is not weakness, but a natural echo of the depth of what was lost. History and literature are filled with voices testifying to this truth. Soldiers decades after war breaking down at the sound of marching boots. Parents who seem healed until they find an old toy at the back of a drawer. Lovers who remarry, build new families, and yet cannot stop the sudden tears when an old photograph falls from a book. The world tells us to move on, but the heart refuses, because love does not vanish. Where love existed, its shadow remains, and that shadow is grief. The paradox is that grief's return is both torment and proof of life. It hurts because it reminds you of what can never be regained. But it also reminds you that what was lost mattered, that it shaped you, that it still breathes inside your memory. Grief is not just pain, it is the echo of love refusing to be erased. The danger lies in misunderstanding this cycle. Many people believe that if grief resurfaces after years, they have failed to heal, that they are weak or broken. But in truth, healing does not mean forgetting. Healing means learning to live with the return, to let the tide wash over you without drowning in it. Each resurgence is a reminder, yes, but also a chance to carry that memory with a little more strength, a little more acceptance. And so grief becomes a lifelong companion. Sometimes silent, sometimes deafening, but always present. It returns in whispers and storms, in shadows and in light. You cannot banish it, because to banish it would mean erasing the love, the bond, the piece of your life that shaped you. Instead, you carry it. Sometimes it weighs heavy, sometimes it feels light, but it is always there. Loss fades, but it does not disappear. And maybe it should not. Because in the endless return of grief lies the endless presence of love. The two are inseparable, different faces of the same truth. To grieve is to have loved, and to still love, even when time has stolen the person from your side. The return is painful, but it is also sacred. It is proof that what you lost still matters, still lives in you, still shapes the person you are becoming. So when grief comes back, do not see it as failure. See it as a visitation, a reminder, a quiet proof that some bonds are too deep for time to erase. Grief ends nothing, it only changes shape. And in its endless return, it keeps love alive. Progress crisis cycle. Progress always feels like triumph. A new invention, a brilliant idea, a cure, a discovery. It shines like a light cutting through the dark. We cheer, we call it advancement, we tell ourselves that humanity has moved forward. But hidden in every solution is a seed of crisis. Because every step of progress eventually creates new problems. This is the cycle, the progress crisis cycle, and once you see it, you realize it has defined every chapter of history, every invention, every so-called solution. Take fire, one of the earliest breakthroughs. It gave warmth, safety, the ability to cook food, to gather in the night. It changed the course of survival itself. But fire also brought destruction. Forests burned, villages destroyed, wars fought with flames. The same gift that saved humanity could also erase it. Think about medicine. Penicillin was hailed as a miracle, ending infections that had killed millions. But the more we used it, the more resistant bacteria became. Today, antibiotic resistance threatens to undo the very progress we once celebrated. The solution created the next crisis. And the same can be seen in countless medical advances. Chemotherapy saves lives, yet devastates bodies. Organ transplants offer hope, yet fuel ethical debates about allocation and access. Every cure carries a shadow. Technology tells the same story. The internet connected the world, collapsing distances, giving ordinary people access to more knowledge than kings once dreamed of. But it also unleashed addiction, misinformation, surveillance, and division on a global scale. Social media promised connection, yet birthed loneliness, envy, and polarization. We reached for progress, but the price was hidden in the fine print. Even in energy, the cycle repeats. Fossil fuels fueled the Industrial Revolution, lifting billions out of poverty, building modern cities, powering medicine and technology. But they also brought climate change, pollution, and the looming crisis of a planet overheating. Now, renewable energy seems like the solution, but already we see new problems. Rare earth mining destroying ecosystems, solar panel waste piling up, wind farms clashing with landscapes and wildlife. Each step forward reshapes the landscape of crisis. And it isn't only technology. Political systems show the same pattern. Democracy rose as a solution to tyranny and monarchy, promising power to the people. Yet it created new challenges. Corruption through wealth, manipulation through media, the tyranny of the majority over minorities. Communism sought to solve inequality, but collapsed under oppression and inefficiency. Capitalism fueled innovation and prosperity, but widened inequality and exploited labor. Every system is born from a solution and eventually creates its own crisis. Even on a personal level, the cycle lives in us. You solve one problem in your life, and almost immediately another emerges. You work hard to secure financial stability, then face the crisis of burnout and emptiness. You chase success to solve insecurity, only to discover loneliness at the top. You find love to end isolation, then discover conflict, jealousy, and the hard work of maintaining intimacy. Every solution births its shadow. Why does this happen? Because progress is never absolute. It shifts balance. Solve one imbalance, and you disrupt another. Like squeezing a balloon, the air moves elsewhere. The human mind seeks control, but reality answers with complexity. Every system we create exists within larger systems we can't fully see. We act with limited vision, and the unseen consequences arrive later, demanding payment. This is why utopia is impossible. Every imagined perfect world forgets that perfection is fragile. Fix hunger, and you may create overpopulation. Fix inequality, and you may suffocate ambition. Fix mortality itself, and you may break the meaning of life. To solve is human, to create crisis from the solution is inevitable. But here's the deeper truth. The progress crisis cycle is not just tragedy, it is also growth. Because with every new problem comes new creativity, new resilience, new discoveries. Fire burned villages, but it also taught us to build safer shelters. Antibiotic resistance pushes us to innovate beyond penicillin. Climate change forces us to rethink how we live, consume, and build. The cycle is painful, but it is also the engine of evolution. Without it, humanity would stagnate. Perhaps the wisdom lies not in trying to escape the cycle, but in learning to live with it. To see solutions not as final victories, but as temporary steps. To ask not only, what does this fix? But what might this break? To accept that every answer carries its next question. Progress is never clean, never absolute, never the final word. It is a conversation with crisis, an eternal rhythm of invention and consequence. And once you see this, you stop expecting solutions to save us completely. You start preparing for the shadows they will cast. Because every time humanity says, "We have solved it," history quietly answers, "Not yet." Expectation disappointment trap. Expectation is a double-edged sword. It gives us something to aim for, a light in the distance, a reason to keep moving. But hidden in its glow is a darker truth. The higher you build your hopes, the deeper the fall when reality does not match them. This is the expectation disappointment trap, a cycle where the very thing that fuels us also ensures our pain. Think about the last time you looked forward to something with intensity. A trip, a date, a new job, a big event. In your mind, you painted it with colors brighter than reality could ever hold. You imagined how it would feel, how it would transform you, how it would exceed every ordinary moment that came before. And then it arrived, and it was fine, maybe even good, but not as perfect as you had built it up to be. And because your hopes soared so high, the gap between imagination and reality left you disappointed, even in something that, objectively, was worthwhile. This trap is universal. Children live in it when waiting for birthdays or holidays, imagining magic only to discover that even celebrations fade too quickly. Lovers fall into it when they idealize one another, believing they have found perfection, only to crash into the humanity of flaws and differences. Ambition is soaked in it. Dreams of wealth, fame, achievement glow in the distance, but when reached, they rarely satisfy the hunger that chased them. We learn, again and again, that anticipation can be more intoxicating than arrival. Psychology reveals why. Our brains are wired to predict, to simulate the future, to create internal movies of what could be. But those movies are edited without flaws. They cut out the mundane details, the awkward silences, the imperfections that reality always carries. So when the real moment arrives, it feels flat, even when it's good, because we are unconsciously comparing it to a flawless projection that never truly existed. There is also the hedonic treadmill. Each time we achieve what we wanted, the thrill quickly fades. A new car becomes just a car. A dream job becomes just a job. The mind adapts, resets, hungers for the next thing. Expectations rise again, setting the stage for deeper disappointment. It's not that life denies us joy, it's that our own expectations poison it before we can taste it. History is full of cautionary tales. Conquerors who believed victory would grant them peace, only to find emptiness. Artists who chased fame, only to discover that recognition didn't quiet their doubts. Even entire societies fall into this trap. Gold rushes, revolutions, utopian dreams, moments when the collective expectation swells beyond what reality could deliver. And when it breaks, disappointment spreads like wildfire, leaving cynicism in its wake. But here is the paradox. We cannot live without expectation. Without it, there is no striving, no movement, no reason to rise each morning. It is expectation that makes us prepare for the future, that fuels hope in the darkest hours. The trap is not that we expect. It is that we tie our happiness too tightly to those expectations being perfectly fulfilled. So what is the escape? One path is lowering expectations, but this can lead to numbness, to a life lived without fire. Another is to expect everything, yet demand nothing, to use hope as fuel but release the outcome. The Stoics taught this: prepare for the best, but accept whatever comes. Zen practice echoes it: live fully in the present, without attaching joy to a future image. The trap loses power when you understand that life owes you nothing, and yet every moment is still something. Imagine going to see the sunrise. If you expect it to be the most beautiful, life-changing event of your existence, you may leave disappointed. Clouds may block it, the colors may be muted, your mind may be distracted. But if you expect nothing, you simply arrive. You watch. And the sky, whether blazing with fire or dull with gray, still gives you something real. The disappointment disappears, not because reality improved, but because you stopped demanding it be more than what it is. The higher your hopes, the deeper your disappointment. That is the trap. But the truth is subtler. The higher your hopes, the more careful you must be not to confuse them with guarantees. Dream, yes. Hope, yes. But hold lightly. Let reality be imperfect, and still find value in it. For disappointment is not proof that hope was a mistake, it is proof that you cared deeply. And caring is the essence of being alive. In the end, maybe the real art is to keep expecting, to keep hoping, but to meet reality not with bitterness when it fails, but with gratitude when it arrives in any form. To build castles in the mind, but not curse the world when it gives you stones instead of gold. To see that life's beauty is not in its perfection, but in its imperfection surviving our expectations. Communication lag problem. Emotional understanding often arrives too late, after the words have already been spoken, after the door has closed, after silence has stretched so far it cannot be pulled back. This is the communication lag problem, the cruel delay between what we feel in the moment and what we truly realize afterward. Think of an argument with someone you love. In the heat of it, your mouth moves faster than your mind. You say things to defend yourself, to win, to strike. Hours later, when the fire has cooled, the truth surfaces. What you actually meant, what you actually needed, what you actually should have said. But by then, the moment has passed. The damage is done. The words you wish you had spoken arrive like late messengers to a battlefield already covered in ash. This lag shows up everywhere. A child leaves home, and only then do parents realize the depth of their unsaid pride. A friendship drifts, and only when it's gone do we recognize how much it anchored us. Even in grief, the most haunting words are the ones never spoken while there was still time. Emotional clarity rarely matches the speed of life's unfolding. By the time understanding comes, action is often impossible. Psychologists connect this to affective lag, the delay in how humans process and interpret feelings. Emotions rise quickly, but meaning takes longer. The body reacts in seconds, but the mind needs reflection. That gap is where regret is born. We misread our fear as anger, our love as irritation, our hurt as indifference. Later, once perspective settles, we see the truth, but the people who needed to hear it may already be gone. And this lag is not only personal, it's cultural. History is full of collective realizations that arrive too late. Societies that failed to act until tragedy forced clarity. Leaders who recognized the cost of their silence only when it could no longer be undone. The lag between recognition and response is written in wars, in disasters, in lives lost because understanding came after the moment for action had passed. So what do we do in the face of this delay? We cannot eliminate it entirely. It is human nature. But we can shorten it. By slowing down before reacting. By listening before assuming. By practicing the uncomfortable art of asking ourselves in the moment, what am I really feeling? What is it I will regret not saying? The pause, however small, is often the difference between speaking truth in time or carrying it as a ghost. The communication lag problem reminds us of the urgency of presence. It asks us to live not only with feeling, but with awareness of feeling. To speak the praise before the goodbye, to voice the apology before the silence, to express the love before the distance. Because once the moment is gone, understanding may still arrive, but it will arrive too late to change what has already been lost. Repetition without learning. You tell yourself you'll never do it again. You've seen the damage, you've felt the regret, you've recognized the mistake with perfect clarity. And yet, days or weeks later, you find yourself right back in the same pattern, saying the same words you swore you wouldn't, making the same choices you thought you'd outgrown. This is the torment of repetition without learning, the paradox of knowing better, yet not doing better. It begins with the illusion that awareness equals change. You believe that once you see your mistake, the lesson is complete. But recognition is only the surface layer of transformation. Beneath it lies habit, emotion, and unconscious wiring. These do not vanish when the conscious mind admits, "I was wrong." The brain's neural pathways, etched by years of repetition, do not dissolve overnight. Like grooves carved into stone, they pull you back toward the familiar, even when the familiar hurts. Psychologists call this the intention-behavior gap. You may intend to act differently, but in the heat of the moment, intentions falter. A smoker knows the health risks, yet lights another cigarette. Someone in a toxic relationship knows the patterns, yet answers the call. A procrastinator knows the deadline, yet scrolls anyway. Knowledge doesn't always translate into new behavior. It collides with desire, fear, and comfort, and often loses. Memory itself plays tricks here. When pain is fresh, the mistake feels unforgettable. But as days pass, memory softens its edges. The sting of regret dulls, and the mind begins to rationalize. It wasn't so bad. This time will be different. What once felt like fire becomes smoke, and smoke is easy to ignore. That forgetting opens the door to repetition. Even deeper is the way identity is tied to mistakes. Sometimes, repeating errors isn't a failure of willpower but a reflection of who you believe you are. If you secretly see yourself as unworthy, undeserving, weak, or cursed, your actions bend to fit that script. You fall back into the mistake not because you haven't recognized it, but because part of you feels it belongs to you. The repetition is a performance of the identity you've unconsciously accepted. History is littered with this cycle. Nations repeat the errors of war even after swearing, "Never again." Generations repeat patterns of oppression, addiction, or exploitation, even while studying the failures of their ancestors. Individuals repeat their parents' mistakes, despite vowing to live differently. Awareness spreads across centuries, but action falters. The lesson is known, yet the behavior returns. This paradox reveals something haunting. Human beings do not learn simply by recognition. We learn through integration. A mistake must be not just seen but embodied, not just remembered but transformed into new pathways of choice. Without that deeper work, the mind splits in two. The part that knows better and the part that lives as if it doesn't. The result is an endless loop of recognition without release. And yet, repetition itself carries a hidden function. Every cycle forces the lesson deeper. Each return to the mistake sharpens the contrast between who you are and who you want to be. Pain accumulates until it can no longer be ignored, until the discomfort of staying the same finally outweighs the comfort of repeating. Transformation often arrives not in the first recognition, but in the 100th repetition, when the wave of awareness finally breaks through the bedrock of habit. So when you repeat mistakes, it does not mean you are incapable of learning. It means you are caught in the slow grind of change, where recognition is only the spark and repetition is the friction that forces you to confront yourself again and again. The trap is believing that knowing should instantly free you. The truth is harsher, but also more forgiving. Knowing is only the beginning. Repetition without learning is the shadow of growth. It haunts you until you realize that awareness without action is a half-truth. That change requires not just recognition but rewiring, not just guilt but courage, not just insight but practice. And when you finally break the cycle, it will not be because you recognized the mistake once, but because you chose, again and again, to step differently, until the grooves in stone began to change. Improvement overwhelm effect. We live in an age obsessed with improvement. Everywhere you look, there are voices urging you to optimize, to upgrade, to fix every flaw and polish every imperfection. Wake up earlier. Meditate longer. Read more books. Journal daily. Exercise harder. Build new skills. Cut out bad habits. Become the best version of yourself. At first, this seems empowering, a map to a brighter, stronger, more fulfilled life. But hidden inside this pursuit is a paradox. The more fixes you chase, the more broken you begin to feel. The very effort to improve yourself begins to erode you. This is the improvement overwhelm effect. It starts innocently. You decide to drink more water, to exercise a few times a week, to read instead of scrolling. These feel achievable, even energizing. But then you encounter 100 more suggestions. Track your sleep, cut out sugar, wake up at 5 a.m., learn a new language, build a side hustle, meditate twice daily, practice gratitude, visualize your future, rewrite your limiting beliefs, learn to code, fast for 16 hours, stretch every evening, and on and on. The list multiplies until self-improvement no longer feels like growth, it feels like drowning. Psychologists call this decision fatigue and cognitive overload. Each fix demands mental energy, to remember, to plan, to execute, to track. The brain, already taxed by the challenges of daily life, becomes burdened with endless self-imposed tasks. Instead of feeling motivated, you feel exhausted. Instead of freedom, you feel trapped. You start measuring yourself not against your past self, but against an impossible ideal built from thousands of shoulds you've collected from books, podcasts, influencers, and mentors. Ironically, the pursuit of improvement often destroys the very things it promised to give. Instead of peace, you feel anxious. Instead of clarity, you feel scattered. Instead of pride, you feel guilt, because no matter how many changes you make, there are always more. You read one productivity method, but then discover 10 others. You start one workout routine, but abandon it when a new one claims to be better. You never feel complete, because improvement culture thrives on convincing you that you are always unfinished. History and culture reveal this trap as well. Ancient Stoics warned against the endless pursuit of self-mastery if it led only to obsession. Religious ascetics who tried to perfect themselves through discipline often burned out, collapsing under the strain of their own expectations. Even in modern workplaces, the push for constant optimization, endless training, performance metrics, leadership courses, often leaves employees disengaged, not empowered. The pattern is clear. Too many fixes do not build strength, they fracture it. The darker side of this effect is shame. When you fail to keep up with all your self-improvement habits, you don't just feel tired, you feel defective. As if the failure to meditate, or journal, or stretch means you are weak-willed or broken. You start to believe you are falling behind in a race you never agreed to run. Improvement, once meant to be healing, becomes another source of self-criticism. You measure your worth not by who you are, but by how perfectly you perform the rituals of self-betterment. And here lies the paradox. True growth often comes not from adding more, but from subtracting. Real progress is choosing a few practices that matter deeply, and letting the rest go. It is understanding that you are not a machine to be endlessly optimized, but a human being who needs rest, balance, and imperfection. The overwhelm comes not from wanting to grow, but from trying to grow in every direction at once. Like stretching a rubber band too far, the more you pull, the more likely it is to snap. The improvement overwhelm effect reminds us that self-fixes can become self-destruction if pursued without limits. You cannot fix everything. You cannot do everything. And you do not need to. Growth is not about chasing every path. It is about finding the right one and walking it with patience. Too much improvement is just another form of burnout, disguised as progress. So when you feel that weight pressing in, that endless list of things to fix, pause. Ask yourself, which changes truly matter? Which ones serve your life, and which ones only serve the illusion that you must always be more? Because sometimes the most powerful improvement is not piling on another routine, another discipline, another demand. Sometimes it is the courage to stop, to breathe, to be enough as you are, so that the few changes you do choose are not chains but freedom. The mirror regret problem. We are taught to change, to improve, to grow. Everywhere you look, the message is the same. Become better, shed your old skin, reinvent yourself. And so, you try. You change your habits, your appearance, your beliefs, your entire way of living. For a while, it feels like victory. You've evolved, you've moved forward. But then, one day, you catch your reflection, and instead of pride, you feel a strange hollowness. Because in changing, you've lost someone, the person you once were. And that absence haunts you. This is the mirror regret problem. The unsettling moment when transformation, instead of feeling like progress, feels like betrayal. It happens in small ways first. Someone who loses weight after years of struggle may look in the mirror and suddenly miss the person who once found comfort in food, who laughed without caring what others thought. Someone who becomes disciplined and driven may look back and miss the dreamer, the carefree version of themselves who believed in possibilities instead of deadlines. You set out to escape flaws, but in the process, you erased entire parts of your identity, parts you didn't realize you'd grieve until they were gone. Psychologists describe this as identity discontinuity, the fracture between who you were and who you are becoming. Humans are wired to crave a coherent sense of self, a narrative that feels continuous. But change disrupts that. The person you once loved being no longer exists, and the person you've become feels unfamiliar, sometimes even artificial. You look in the mirror and wonder, did I evolve, or did I abandon myself? History shows us this paradox in larger scales too. Think of cultures that modernize rapidly. Traditions are abandoned for progress, yet decades later, nostalgia rises like a ghost. Languages disappear, rituals fade, and generations regret losing something ancient that once gave them identity. Change promised advancement, but it also created mourning. What is true for societies is also true for individuals. Progress comes with grief for the person or the past left behind. This regret grows sharper when the changes were born out of pain. Someone who hardened themselves after betrayal may regret losing their innocence, their openness, their ability to trust. Someone who toughened under struggle may regret the softer self that once believed the world was kind. You survive by changing, but survival demands sacrifice, and sometimes the sacrifice is a version of yourself you'll never get back. The mirror becomes a symbol of this conflict. You stand there, looking into your own eyes, recognizing the face but feeling a dissonance with the soul. The reflection asks, was it worth it? And no matter how strong, successful, or improved you seem, a part of you aches for the simplicity, the rawness, the flaws that once defined your story. But here is the harder truth. Regret is the twin of transformation. You cannot grow without shedding something. Every step forward means leaving behind a path not taken, a version of yourself that will never live again. And grief for that version is natural. It is not weakness to miss who you were. It is evidence that you lived fully enough to matter to yourself. The danger, however, is in clinging too tightly to the ghost of the past self. Because just as you once outgrew an old identity, the regret itself can trap you. If you long endlessly for who you were, you become unable to honor who you are now. The mirror then becomes not a reflection, but a prison, showing you what was, but not what is. The wisdom lies in integration. To honor your past selves, not erase them. To realize that the carefree dreamer, the soft-hearted believer, the flawed but unbroken version of you, those selves live inside you still, not as lost ghosts, but as foundations. You are not betraying them by changing. You are carrying them forward in altered form. Growth doesn't mean abandoning who you were. It means weaving them into who you are becoming. Imagine life as a book. Each chapter closes, but none are erased. You may look back on early chapters with longing, even with sorrow for the character you once were. But the story doesn't end there. That character is still part of the plot. They gave you depth, they gave you lessons, they made the later chapters possible. The mistake is believing that regret means you should turn back. In reality, regret is just the echo of chapters that mattered. The mirror regret problem will never fully disappear. You will always feel pangs for the selves you've left behind. But instead of letting that regret paralyze you, you can let it remind you, change has weight. Growth has cost. And that cost is proof that you are alive, evolving, becoming. So the next time you stare into your reflection and feel that ache for the person you once were, don't see it as a betrayal. See it as a reunion. You are not just who you are now. You are also every version you've ever been. The child, the dreamer, the broken one, the healer. They are all still here, standing with you in the mirror. And that is not loss. It is legacy. The unreachable closure. Some wounds leave scars so deep that no amount of time, no amount of reflection, no amount of healing rituals can fully erase them. You can talk them through, you can understand them intellectually, you can even forgive the people involved. Yet when you touch the memory, when you brush against that place inside yourself, you realize the ache is still there. This is the unreachable closure, the reality that some experiences never resolve, they only soften, and some pain never leaves completely, it simply learns to live with you. We like to believe in full closure. That if you work hard enough on your healing, you will move on, get over it, or find peace. Movies and books often promise this neat arc: pain, struggle, resolution, redemption. But life rarely fits into such clean narratives. Sometimes there is no apology, no explanation, no justice. Sometimes the person who hurt you is gone forever, or the version of you who was hurt can't be restored. Sometimes the event was so defining that to erase its influence would mean erasing a part of who you are. Closure is not always possible, and to demand it is to set yourself up for deeper disappointment. Think about grief. When someone you love dies, people often say, "Time heals all wounds." But anyone who has lived with loss knows this isn't true. Time changes the wound, reshapes it, dulls its sharpest edges, but the absence never disappears. Birthdays, anniversaries, random moments of memory reopen it. You learn to live alongside the absence, but it never closes completely. That empty chair at the table, that song on the radio, that scent in the air. Suddenly the past is alive again, and the wound proves it never really left. The same is true for betrayal. You can forgive a friend or partner for breaking your trust, you can even rebuild something with them, but the fracture is always there. In the quiet moments, a doubt lingers. In new relationships, echoes of old betrayal surface, shaping the way you trust again. You are not trapped in the past, but you carry it with you. Closure here is not a locked door, it is a door that rattles every time the wind of memory passes by. Psychologists have studied this under the lens of ambiguous loss. It's the pain that has no clear ending, no final resolution. A parent who disappears without explanation. A child who goes missing. A partner who drifts away emotionally but remains physically present. In such cases, closure never comes because the story never finishes. The human mind craves resolution, but when it doesn't arrive, the wound stays open, demanding acceptance of the unresolved. And perhaps the deepest layer of unreachable closure lies within the self. Mistakes you made years ago, opportunities you missed, words you wish you could take back. You replay them, hoping one day the guilt or regret will evaporate. Sometimes it lessens. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you carry the knowledge of what you cannot undo for the rest of your life. It becomes woven into the fabric of your identity. Not because you failed to heal, but because some things are not meant to vanish. They are meant to remind. So what do we do with wounds that never close? We stop demanding closure as the measure of healing. We realize that healing doesn't always mean erasure, it means integration. It means carrying the wound with grace, without letting it define the whole of us. It means understanding that pain can exist alongside joy, that scars can coexist with growth. You don't have to be over it to move forward. You only have to learn how to carry it without letting it consume you. Think of a tree struck by lightning. The bark is split, the scar visible for decades. The tree doesn't erase the wound, it grows around it. Rings form, branches extend, leaves return each season. The scar remains, but so does the life. This is the truth of unreachable closure. You don't erase the wound, you expand around it until it no longer limits your growth. And maybe there is a kind of strange beauty in that. To accept that some wounds will always ache, and yet to live fully anyway. To know that the absence, the betrayal, the regret, will flare up sometimes, but that does not mean you are broken. It means you are human. Closure is not always about sealing the door. Sometimes it's about learning to walk with it open, to let the drafts in, to let the echoes pass through. Some wounds never fully heal, but life continues, richer and deeper precisely because they remain.